Good evening. The first item on the open session agenda is reading of the district vision, core beliefs, and values. I will not. Secretary Cowan, will you start the district vision, core beliefs?
Mix it up. All right. The vision. Austin ISD will reinvent the urban school experience. Jamie.
Oh. Trustee Wagner.
Okay. I'm starting.
Would you start with the core belief one then?
Yeah.
Core belief 1. All students will graduate college, career, and life ready.
Core belief 2, we will create an effective, agile, and responsive organization.
Core belief 3, we will create vibrant relationships critical for successful students and schools.
Our values include the whole child and every child, physical, social, emotional health and safety, equity, diversity, and inclusion, high expectations for all students, employees, parents, guardians, and community members, creativity, collaboration, and innovation, community, schools, and lifelong learning.
Thank you. Secretary Cowan, will you please provide a review of calendar items on upcoming agendas?
Yes. Following spring break next week, the board will meet on March 19th to hear a student complaint and employee grievance, and just added discussion on Norman and Sims. On March 20th, the board will meet for our own self-evaluation. Our regular board meeting will take place on March 26th. We will recognize the Austin Board of Realtors, local chambers of commerce, and AISD students who have been named 2018 National Merit Scholars, U.S. Presidential Scholars, and National Hispanic Scholars. Following public comment, the board will consider approval of consent agenda items. The board will meet on March 28th in an effort to finalize work on the superintendent's 18-19 scorecard, focusing on constraints. The April 9th work session will begin with an executive session on the superintendent's 2017-18 mid-year review. The public portion of the meeting includes discussion on core belief 1, social and emotional learning, core belief 3, school health, the 18-19 superintendent scorecard, a multi-year budget stabilization plan, the student code of conduct, and the board handbook. It's a very full agenda. We can do it. We can do it, Trustee Ellens. The March 26th and April 9th agendas will be further developed after the March 21st board operations meeting. And we remind interested parties to visit austinisd.org/board/meetings as each meeting approaches to find the most accurate agendas.
Thank you, Secretary Cowan. I just want to provide a brief update to the public. When we did our approval of agenda, we passed a motion to move the item 13, the Norman Elementary and Sims Elementary Modernization Project update, at the request of Dr. Gordon to move it to March 19th during our work session there. So anyone who's interested in that issue, I just wanted to make sure that they knew we had moved it to the March 19th work session. The next item on the agenda is the update from board committee chairs. We only had one committee that met since the last board work session, the Board Operations Committee, and I'm going to provide an update on the Board Operations Committee meeting. The committee met on Wednesday, February 21st, 2018, and the following items were discussed. The board governance items, Senate Bill 1566. Number 2, student outcomes, a follow-up at the retreat. Terry will poll the trustees for 2 dates, one for the school year 18-19 scorecard and one for the board self-evaluation. Item 3 was housekeeping and next steps. And we had an update, 108 and 109 admin emailed information on 108 and 109 update coming to the board. Can you want to give some clarification to that one? No? I don't know, you see it.
Well, board updates come from TASB a lot of times, and so the superintendent was going to send us background information on that so that when we vote on it to approve it, we'll have that information.
Yeah. The next item was a technology update, and we're going to schedule a presentation for a future work session with Kevin Schwartz. The next steps were for technology, social emotional learning, hub, bilingual education sessions, and the technology session will be scheduled, and the SEL session was held on February 19th. The hub is scheduled for March 28th, and bilingual education will be scheduled. We also talked about school name changes and moved it to a future work session. We next talked about the No Place for Hate for board members. Cindy and Geronimo will be looking into incorporating communities of respect into the board member handbook, and we will consider it in the upcoming board self-evaluation. Officers would like the board member handbook shared at candidate orientations. The next item is school security. On March 5th, the work session agenda executive session was at 5 p.m., which we just did. The next item was retreat date. Email to be sent out with date choices, 2 retreats, one on the scorecard and board self-evaluation. We also, is that right? Yeah. But then we also discussed the FAD PAC chairs and the officers to observe the April 12th meeting of the FAD PAC. The Citizens Bond Oversight Committee chair, Cindy has 1 opening, Geronimo has 2 openings, officers to observe the next CBOC meetings. On modernization timeline, Norman M. Sins, it's on the March 5th agenda with target for March 26th consent agenda, although I will add we just moved it to the March 19th work session. The review of the budget process benchmarks through approval June 18th on April 23rd of our regular meeting agenda. It's item 8.1. The next item was scheduling of grievances for March per Todd. We have 2 are scheduled. And the next item is sustainability, which is a request for AISD's Got Talent recognition at a future date or report in a board update. The next item is the annual agenda planning calendar and administration to send it in an email. The next item is board goals and calendar, and we need to add middle of the year results to the schedule. A few other items. The next one is time limits for talking on the dais for topics that may be lengthy. Suggestions to limit talking time as in Congress and will be considered on a case-by-case basis. The next item was monitoring IR schools, where we need clarification from Yasmin on the issue. The next topic was the FAD PAC update, the request to receive in board update, request to receive in the board updates. The next item is preparation for the March board operations meeting agenda, the date of education sessions for bilingual education, the retreat dates, update on external committees, and whether all the positions are filled, the hiring of the internal auditor, the Allen property usage, which will be sent in a board update, the code next update, and then a meeting debrief that happened for 5 minutes, and then we adjourned at 2:15. The first item on the agenda is a discussion on core belief 1, PBL and capstone. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, sorry. Sorry, I'm going back to my next item is an update from the superintendent regarding security.
Okay. Thank you, Trustee Rodriguez and board members. As we know, safety has been a significant issue for all of us over time, and it certainly is heightened with some of the situations that we've been dealing with at some of our schools here in Austin, but certainly in the state and in the country. And I would just want to make sure that we all know that safety is extremely important for us here in Austin ISD to keep all of our students and staff members safe so that they can learn. Our core mission is about making sure that all students graduate from AISD ready for college, career, and life. And we all know that students need a safe environment to do that and to realize that very outcome. Just to maybe share with our community some of the work that's been happening over time through some considerations and some meetings with parents, with ACPTA leads and PTA parents, principals, and even at my students' superintendent roundtable, talking about safety and posing issues around what we need to do to make sure all of our schools are safe and to make sure that our students have a safe learning environment. It was already some of those had already been scheduled, but it was a timely conversation just given some of the situations we're dealing with right now. The board has had an update in executive session around safety and some of the considerations that we have in place around making sure all of our campuses and staff members know what to do in emergency situations. But just to bring back some of these things that it's a way of learning and maybe unlearning some practices we've had in place for several years. But things such as making sure that that individuals know that they have to come into the front office, that is a single point of entry, that everybody's got to come in through the front office and check in through our Raptor system, that staff members all have their AISD badges. When coming to visit a school, if we don't have a visitor badge, then we have an AISD badge. If we see somebody on campus who we don't know or does not display a badge or a notice, then we ask them, and we ask them to come into the front office to make sure to check in. We have to make sure to keep all doors locked. Just a different situation that we need to make sure that we do across all of our different sites. I know this has been in place for many years, but we want to make sure that it's done every day, and it's something that we continue to practice among all of our, in all of our different communities. We want to make sure that that our campuses are also practicing their safety procedures, and also district level staff, whether here at CAC or at Baker or maintenance facilities, that we're all practicing safety protocols and asking questions about making sure we're doing the right thing for our staff members as well. I've sent several letters to our parents and to our principals on how to talk to our kids about safety. As a parent, I've had my kids ask me about safety and some of these considerations. And it's just important that we do take time to sit with our kids and talk about it. It is on their minds, and it is important, and that it is important, I feel, that we need to engage in a dialogue with our students. Something that we put out there that I think we can never say enough of, and that is with students and with adults, if you see something, say something. That has truly been a good response from our students, because they want to make sure that they're safe, but they're also in this with us, so that they can alert an adult on that campus. If they see something, they need to let one of us know that something's going on, and we need to go look into that a little bit more. I just wanted to highlight some of the key things that we're doing around safety, and some practices that aren't different, but are the best practices that we need to ensure that we are implementing every single day at all of our school sites. I do want to thank our Chief Evo and all our police department, and Michaela for her and her team. Amazing work really throughout the year, but especially now in these past few weeks where we've had some situations that perhaps we've not dealt with in the past, but you've been there to support our schools, our parents, our students in such important ways that people feel that. And I do thank you, and please pass this on to your team members as well, because I do think that goes a long way for me as superintendent, but for the Austin community to know that we have you on our side. I also want to thank the Austin Police Department with a recent situation in one of our campuses. Austin PD was also there with us, working hand in hand to address the situations around student safety. I just think some of these things are important. I will also say, with our one situation that happened at one of our campuses recently, all of our parents at night at Aikens could actually hold on and hug their kids. So the school was doing exactly what they should do. During that time, they were keeping their kids safe. And my seeing that, and we have Ms. Hosak, who's here in the room, was demonstrated extraordinary leadership on her part and that of her team members to really putting themselves aside and having student safety at the forefront. That was so evident to me and to others that that's what that school represents, and how powerful that is to see that in action. So thank you, Ms. Hosak. I know you're here on a separate issue, but since you're here now, really to thank you and your team, and even talking to your faculty that day. There were a lot of tears that day too, I will say, because I think we were coming down off of what had just happened. And while you're in the moment, there is no time to think, other than we've got to keep everybody safe, and that's job one. I also know that we need to improve our communication systems. I agree, and I get that. But the one thing we always have to do is make sure that all of our kids go home safe to their parents, and that was done. And so I want to thank Brandy and your chief and Michaela, other administrators who's actually went to Aikens to help us to ensure the situations was all being, that all kids were being taken care of while we were there on the campus. And with that, just wanted to give the board a quick update on some of our safety protocols.
Thank you. We appreciate that very, very much. Yes, ma'am. We're going to move on to the next item, but
I just wanted to comment. I too want to thank our police officers for the excellent work that they've done, our staff, and I wanted to introduce to the public Michaela Myers, who has been trained by Homeland Security, and she did work with Homeland Security in New York. So I think we have the best here working with our students and our staff, and Ms. Myers and her staff are in the process of training all of our staff, and that includes our students too, because they need to know how to react in these kinds of situations. There's no way we can protect against everything. The best protection is an informed staff, informed students, and informed public who practice so that they know how to react in the most appropriate way. So thank you, Ms. Myers. Welcome on board. Appreciate your being. Well, you've been here a year and a half, so we just hadn't had a chance to officially welcome you. So welcome from New York. We thank you, and we want our parents to know that parents and other caregivers of our students, that they are in good hands. We might not always be able to share every piece of information for security reasons. We hope that they understand that and that they don't second guess our experts, because I think sometimes we have some people who second guess experts, and that creates a lot of confusion and heartache. So thank you again, and I appreciate your update, Superintendent Cruz.
Thank you, Trustee Teich. Secretary Cowan.
Thank you, Dr. Cruz, and thank you, staff. I can't imagine what was going on down at the campus, so Principal Hosak, thank you. I wanted to look at this, have this conversation even in a little bit more broad context. Our governor has called to action and asked schools to make sure that they're safe, and I feel very comfortable with the efforts that our AISD police force are putting into place. I think one thing that the public and that our elected officials should also realize is the cost for us to do this. And occasionally they have, I would say flippantly, told us to put more dollars into paying our teachers, which we would love to do. But there's a cost in everything that we do to take care of our children. And we're running a billion-dollar business, as Dr. Cruz says quite often. Dr. Cruz, how much do we spend, if you could say, on security measures on our 130-plus campuses and buildings?
I'm going to ask Chris to give me that number. The overall, with because we're talking about with SROs, with hall security, hall monitors.
And I don't know if you also have, our security cameras, things that, even the physical aspect of it too. Take transportation for you all. Do you have that number?
I don't know all the numbers from the different departments, because each department does have a piece of the security. I can tell you the budget for the police department is $6.6 million, and that involves our life and safety emergency management, our patrol officers, our investigators, everything. That's all contributed to security. Now, as I said before, other departments, our construction management folks, our transportation, whatever measures of security they provide. I couldn't give you that cost analysis right now.
Okay. I do really think that this is going to be important for us to have, because I think that when we do talk to the School Finance Commission, or we do talk to our legislators, that we have a definite number, at least a ballpark, of what part of our budget goes into these security measures, which we all would certainly support. But I think as they give us more and more unfunded mandates, we need to make sure that they realize what they're doing to us. And interestingly enough, today in the newspaper, I don't know if you all saw this or not, but I guess the local sheriff takes care of schools in Florida here in Volusia County. And he is now saying that students or their families would have to pay the costs of investigations, at least $1,000 and sometimes much more, when they make these terroristic threats. I'm not necessarily proposing we do that, but I think it's real interesting, and he thinks that that's something that's going to, boy, if my kids did that, you might have a good talking to your kids and know what they're doing and where they are. But anyway, thank you so much, and perhaps we can get those real solid numbers.
Absolutely. We can follow up with the total budget on security.
I'll make sure if there's any other board members that want to say something. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I just wanted to touch on two first, to echo Trustee Teich's thanks, both for the police work that was done to keep our students safe, not only during an active situation, but also every day. I know it's a great deal of work and a great deal of care that you guys put into keeping our students safe. And also thankful to the administration, particularly Ms. Hosak, and seeing how everything was handled. I know that there have been some concerns that I'm hearing from my own community just about communications, but I think it's important to reiterate that in talking to the chief and talking to the superintendent, that I feel confident sending my children to school every day. And 2 of my children attend AISD schools, and I know that when they walk onto that campus, that everything possible that can be done is being done to keep them safe and protected and keep their well-being at highest consideration when they're there. And for that, I thank you and I appreciate that, and I want to make sure that our community understands and knows that as well. These are challenging times for all of us. I know that the communications is something that's an ongoing effort, and honestly, we're in uncharted waters. I mean, we are dealing with a lot of situations and things going on that we, along with the rest of the country, haven't had to deal with before, and I am very appreciative of hearing you, Dr. Cruz, talk about the fact that, stating humbly that we are working on that, and we are improving, and we know that we still have work to do, and knowing that that's an active and ongoing effort, and making sure that our community knows that we're doing our very best to improve and make sure that parents have the information that they need without jeopardizing ongoing police work that is happening in the process. So, thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Wagner. Thank you. Any other trustees? Superintendent Cruz, I just want to thank you and your team for all their leadership around these issues, and appreciate you all spending an hour with us in executive session, being very open, transparent, and candid around these issues. So we appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
The first item on the agenda is a discussion on Core Belief 1, PBL, and Capstone. And this discussion is part of Core Belief 1. All students will graduate college, career, and life ready, and will include an overview of the strategic plan scorecard indicators. Dr. Cruz?
Okay, absolutely. So Vice President Rodriguez and board members, as we have our team members get set up, you do have in your folder, and I believe Terry handed it around, we have a PowerPoint that we thought would help in synthesizing some of the key information, so we could go through it to perhaps get some questions or comments at the end of the session. So the first one we're going to look at is the one that's Core Belief 1, PBL, and Capstone projects. This is an item that's been on the scorecard for a few years. We started this with looking at a pilot and looking how we're going to develop something. 2 things on this one. This goes, the reason why we're doing something like this, much more into authentic learning, where students put multiple skills all together at one time to demonstrate their proficiency. So while we do teach skills in very discrete ways, and we should, a compilation of skills have to come together so that students can then work in environments such as this, where they're listening to information, they're synthesizing, they're going to provide some feedback on it. It's very complex when students actually have to put all these skills together in a real life situation. Secondly, we want to make sure that students, that we're building student agency, that students are really taking command of their own learning, and they understand how they learn, and they have their interests. I do believe that'll bring depth of understanding of very complex issues and content, but it's very relevant to students. So I do think that it's important that we look at this as something that's different. Now, I'll say I know that we've had many teachers implementing this in AISD for a number of years. But one of the things we say is all means all. So what we're saying here is all 5th grade, all 8th grade, and all students at the high school level within 12th grade. It's not if you are in this class or if you register for this course and you have this teacher. We're saying it's everybody. So we want to walk away with some assurances that these skills that we're teaching in very discrete ways, and other teachers do other types of problem-based learning, that we have assurances in the system where students will be exposed to these types of opportunities. So with that, let me have our staff members introduce themselves, and we'll go through our presentation.
Good evening, trustees. I'm Lisa Goodnow, and I'm Executive Director of Academics and Social Emotional Learning.
I may have just turned this off. I'm sorry. I'm Sandra Cresswell. I'm the Associate Superintendent for the Area 1 Elementary Schools.
Good evening. I'm Craig Shapiro, the Associate Superintendent of High Schools.
And we are presenting briefly, and I will stay brief because I could talk about this almost all night. Our progress really on these two indicators, because we're gathering the data in June. This is a baseline year, but we did want to update you to the progress around professional learning and really the development of PBL. Understanding that this is central to core belief 1, and that the skills that the students practice are absolutely the things that get them ready for career, college, and life. So as we reinvent the urban school experience, we talk about how we are going to reinvent that instructional core and reinvent teaching and learning for all students in every classroom, every grade. And with that, we see that PBL is truly a student-centered and student-driven pedagogy. By that, we really hope that our teachers, and it's not easy for teachers, but to give up a little bit of control and serve as guides on the sides. You sometimes hear that, and really become facilitators of students' learning. When Dr. Cruz speaks of agency and identity, it's helping students identify their passions and their strengths and then lead them through the process. PBL promotes active student learning, engaging students, motivating students. Sometimes it's the applications of skills and content knowledge that they already have, but it also produces a thirst and hunger to learn more and to read more and to do more research as they move through the problem. PBL absolutely prepares kids for life in that it integrates, it's interdisciplinary, and it is an application of that content and knowledge and skills. So in Austin ISD, we really look at PBL, problem-based learning, as inquiry learning, and we distinguish this somewhat from what you might hear as project-based learning, and so sometimes those terms are interchangeable because back in the day it was project-based. You do see some districts moving to a project-based and we want to avoid sort of that poster of the week. We really do want students to dive into large issues, study large issues, practice the skills and content around those issues, and then drive it home. So it's really a system of problem-based learning that we're looking for. You can see it in kinder, you can see it in pre-K where kids follow their passion, and we want a system that moves all the way up to capstone. So again, the 5th and 8th grade is a way for us to peer in and see how we're developing the capacity of teachers and students to learn this way, and then move to that capstone project as seniors. I think we heard some beautiful testimony to what great PBL is at the Ethnic Studies Summit. Really, students at Ann Richards have told us in the little video that this is how that knowledge gets stuck in my head because I have to apply it, and I also have to work with my colleagues, my sisters, my teammates to get through and push through the problem. Again, some passionate work is happening in those ethnic study courses, and we really want this to be a system so it's all students at some point every grade and every class. I think that we have an example.
We do, and I could talk about this all day long. I was trained in it in, I want to say 1995, and it just changed the way I taught. But at Linder, I was talking to the principal, and we were just talking about student-centered learning, and she was sharing with me her kids had noticed that they had ants in the school. And so some of them were talking to her about it, and she said, we put in work orders, and she was explaining the process to them. And they said, well, what could we do about it? So they started looking at the problem of ants at Linder. And they called the district personnel to talk to them about what they had done. They researched and came up with questions, wanted to know, well, is it about weather? Because some of the kids had noticed at home that they have these big mounds of ants after it rains, so they tied it to what they were experiencing at home. They wanted to know if maybe they were just tough ants and they couldn't kill them. I mean, they were just trying to find out, why do we keep getting ants in our classroom? And so they did their research. They went out, they researched not only just about the ants themselves and found out that there are different kinds of ants, but they also looked at what's the solution for this, and they wanted to come up with some natural solutions for those kids that had difficulties with chemicals and needed natural products. And they even tried making their own products. So this truly was a student-centered problem that they were trying to solve. They had their Eagle News group that would report out over the airwaves, if you will, and telling them where they were at with it. So it used their science, their math, their writing abilities, their communication skills in every sense. It was a problem-based, and they finally found out that the district was onto something and solved the ant problem. So it was a great learning experience, and they had it at multiple grade levels that tied into the strengths of the students.
And what we love about that is that, so the students really will never forget that. And then the learning that comes from that is measured not necessarily through the typical grade, but problem-based learning is naturally linked to standards-based learning and standards-based grading, and it really lays the foundation for that. So we have developed a rubric that you do it is an attachment, and we have kind of an overview of that attachment for clarity's sake tonight.
Mm-hmm. So if you look in your packet, there's the one that says proficiency rubric at the top, and it goes through all the problem, process, and solution. So they define their real-world problem. They do have check-in points. It's not just a free-for-all. We want to make sure and the students are reflecting on their learning and they're going back and are we on the right track? Are we asking the right questions? All of those things. And then after they reflect and revise, then there's a public solution and the product at the end. And the product can look like various things. It's always powerful when the kids get up and make a presentation and say, here are the things we tried, and here's what worked, here's what didn't, and so here's why we think this is the solution. Also in your packet, there is the timeline, and it starts with the summer of 2017, but in 16-17 we also explored PBL, and what we did was ask every campus to at least try it out. You might do it in a classroom, you might have a grade level, it might be a school-wide problem, but to at least explore it so that we could get some feedback on the PD that we had been presenting to both the principals and to teachers. And we did get a lot of feedback this summer and began some more design work. And then this fall, that's when the rubric was created with input. And we have two modules for PD. One is a one-day, and it really just lays the foundation for problem-based learning, how to use the rubric, the meaning, and how to begin to implement it at the school. And then our two-day, part two is a two-day, and it really gets into the designing of problem-based learning and designing those units.
If I can just mention on the rubric, the rubric goes through a progression of what are just basic questions, such as memorizing dates, things that are just rote memorization. But then what does that mean? Do you remember the date that something happened or not? When you look at the mastery level, those are higher order or higher level thinking skills. Why do you think there was so much conflict during that time? How would you have brought in a different resolution? How would you then engage others in that problem solving? That's a different level of inquiry. That's where we need to make to with, and really in all our lessons, but certainly in here, is that we take students through a progression. That it's not just reporting facts and dates and something that students will learn for a test or a grade, but then a week or 6 weeks later, at the end of the year, they have no idea what they did. So we don't take that grade back and say, well, you did make a 90, but you really didn't learn it. You remembered it for the test, but did you really learn it? Probably not. But something that truly is authentic, that's where higher level comes in, and that's where learning is contextualized. There's some experience with that, and that's where, when you look at the rubric, it sort of goes through those very fact-based type questions, like when did this, like I mentioned, to higher level questioning. And what we have to do is, for kids who are just used to it, that just becomes the norm. That's really the way they engage with content, whether they're working with others or just individually and just sort of engaging with certain content, certain novel or whatever that may be. Okay.
So that brings us to the capstone in the 12th grade, which is a personalized project that really is a reflection of their learning over their 12 years in school. It's not just a project that's built in that one class. And it's an opportunity for kids to show off their skills in many different areas, not just in a particular subject or grade. And then the key components include student choice, identifying essential standards, and creating a project including design and implementation and analysis. And at the bottom, I have two phrases: acquisition of knowledge and application of knowledge. And the concept behind a capstone or any project-based assessment project, we're reminded by our industry partners all the time, Apple, Google, IBM, Dell, Seton, that it's not just about knowing facts and having credentials and certifications. It is really about, can you apply knowledge? Can you apply those knowledge and skills in a real live workplace problem? And it goes back to the 6 C's, and it's moving us away from isolating our curriculum into small silos to testing them individually and putting them all together to give the kids the concept of why they're learning what they're learning, how all the pieces fit in. Examples of that could be, I know students that write very well, speak very well, but then they go into an interview or go into a situation where they have to work with others in a work situation, and they can't. So there's an example of one of many where industries are saying the students can't seem to put it all together. So this is forcing our system now to have these conversations of not just having a test to a standard, but how do we put standards together? How do we make this real for the students? And how do the students see, most importantly, why they're learning what they're learning? And that's a shift that's more than just a training, that's more than just a day or two, although it helps when you're going over a rubric, but it's a philosophy shift from what that definition of learning truly is. And so the capstone brings all of those skills together, and it's critical when our kids go to college and career in life. Those pieces are they need to show off how they combined all those skills and not isolated. They know them in isolated ways on standardized tests, for example.
Really, the design of problem-based learning in the district has been an effort of a cross-functional team from human capital and professional development, from the associates teams, from the content areas, from social emotional learning, from technology. It's truly a cross-functional team designing problem-based learning and implementing problem-based learning across the district, and it is living problem-based learning. So we're really practicing those things we want to see in the classroom as we tackle this project.
Thank you. Any questions? Trustee Tyson?
Thank you very much for this update and report on how we're implementing this, and I'm very excited about this. As someone who used project-based learning in her classroom, when I was teaching, I found that that's where my students were very engaged, and I didn't receive a lot of training on it. I just kind of picked it up from graduate courses that I took, et cetera. So I'm really glad to see that we have PD associated with this. I have several questions. What do you do to bring new teachers on board? How are they brought into the system? And then how is doing a rubric is kind of it's a skill, and might be labeled kind of a soft skill because it's not like hard data, but how are new teachers brought into the system and trained? And then how do we monitor to make sure that all teachers are using, and this is a common rubric, right, for 5 through 8 in the capstone, so all teachers are supposed to be using this across the district. How do we make sure that there's reliability in their assessments as much as is possible?
I think that's one of the reasons we found that we needed that deep professional learning for teachers in our system. One thing I'm speaking with Jan John and Dr. Medina frequently about is what is that profile for the first-year teacher of training that we want to ensure that all first-year teachers get. And clearly an introduction to PBL is an essential component of that. The best, so there's that level 1 PBL training for a new teacher. Also, partnering that teacher, that new teacher, with a veteran on the campus, or if they, sometimes we have teachers who may be sort of be like the only content area teacher at a high school level. That happens. And so we are finding more and more the benefits of blend and ways that we can connect teachers to blend and learn from each other as a tool for their own learning. So it's really kind of blended learning for them as well, so they continue their learning. But that's why we're seeing this sort of level 1, level 2, level 3. We're offering it throughout the summer, and we'll offer it again in the fall. But we do have a commitment that this is a face-to-face training initially, followed on by other kinds of blended learning opportunities.
So I think that the principals and the other admin on the campuses would be responsible for monitoring this kind of thing, 5 through 8, and then at the capstone level. And have we explored, or maybe I've missed this, is this part of the PPFT evaluation? Do principals look for this? PBL and then the capstone?
And we have been having the principals participate in training as well at the level meetings, so that when they go into the classrooms, they know what to look for. And we've provided some look-fors for them, depending on what the actual problem unit is. But we've also rolled out an assignment where it's assigned to all 5th grade homeroom teachers, and they will get a proficiency, or they'll get some kind of rating. We're going to collect those that are proficient at it, and that's on every campus for every 5th grader.
What about for middle school?
And that's 8th grade is the same, only it's rolled out as a course, I believe, instead of the assignment.
So if I'm understanding correctly, the principals are aware, will be trained, understand what the rubrics look like. This is a common rubric.
Yes.
And then they will be looking for that in classrooms. And when they go into classrooms, if they see something that maybe looks like chaos, it's actually... they understand that it could be part of student-centered learning, student-led learning, and that it's actually not chaos. And so I think some of the trustees in the past have expressed concerns about training on the rubric. Is it reliable? You can have inter-rater reliability. That can be going on. I don't know if that's something that you all do to kind of like on campuses have various teachers, do some test evaluations of projects and that kind of thing, and then to see how close they come to actually, the same thing. So also, soft skills is something that Dr. Shapiro alluded to as part of the capstone, and I see where that's in the capstone. That's a huge chunk of the capstone. I already lost it, but anyway, so the whole last part is presentation to industry, et cetera. Where is it located in the rubrics for 5 through 8? I didn't quite see it in there. I'm sure it is. I'm just not sure where it is. And we've got that. We've got the rubrics for 5 through 8 in our notebooks.
So it really, the sort of last segment of that rubric is where we touch on the 6 C's, and then there's a second rubric that is more for teachers to reflect on as they design their PBL, and then also as they guide students through it. But we really are encouraging at the 5 and 8 grade level to look at communication, collaboration, critical thinking, cultural proficiency, connectedness, those pieces that really then build to and I think they're hard skills now. I think they're as important really as reading, writing,
math.
They can
get you fired or hired.
Right.
And
so as we are using that, again, to kind of explore ourselves and come up with a district consensus around how we define those and what they look like at different grade bands. And that's some work of our IDT right now, our academic IDT, as we build a student learning framework with target behaviors that we're looking for around those 6 Cs, as well as the SEL competencies. So again, these things really are part of whole child at its core. And so it's how we drive whole child into really academic content, that instructional core that Dr. Cruz and I love to talk about.
And I'm just going to suggest again that the implementation of SEL, which should permeate everything that we do in all of our schools, because we could create world peace, I've said this before, if we actually all did it here in our schools, and then our kids went home and talked about it to their adults in their families, they could, perhaps spread that message. But that implementation across all of our vertical teams is not even at this point, and I think it really needs to be looked at. And so I'm going to get back to that PPFT question. That's for teachers. I'm assuming that principals, and I haven't looked at the latest evaluation instrument for principals, that they would be, their evaluators would be looking at how they implement SEL and how they implement and how they work with the projects, the PBL and that kind of thing, so that would be part of a principal's evaluation too. So once again, is this part of PPFT? The capstone and the PBL?
So where you really will see PBL or something like the capstone and PPFT is that column 4. So I think of the PPFT as in 3. It really is, again, it's kind of mastery in that it's a rubric that is on a scale from 1 to 4. And in 3, you really are looking at what the teacher behavior is. Column 4 is over and over and over, you see student owning their learning. So the students are the ones driving their learning. Again, you'll score that 4 if you are facilitating from the side and the students are really driving in the driver's seat, and it's the student ownership of their own learning. And that's so you don't say, you might not walk in and say, oh, check, they're doing PBL. It's almost deeper than that, really. It is.
Specifically, they do it through that.
Yes, it's in the PPFT. But this is still, the teacher creates the situations, right? So that's the condition that the teacher set, but then are the students, because the teacher can create the conditions, but are the students thriving in those conditions? And that's where you'll see that very student-centered teaching and learning in the 4.
Thank you. 2 more points. I think it'd be helpful if we started instituting evaluations of principals by teachers and staff. So I know that would be like a total 180 for this district, but I think we should start doing that. And number 2, the second comment or question is actually, which schools in districts 1, 2, and 3, K through 12, are currently involved in PBL? Because what I'm hearing from some of those schools is that there's still an emphasis on a lot of drilling and getting ready for the STAR to the exclusion of PBL and the arts, which disturbs me. So I understand that, because of the way the state has structured its evaluation system through TEA, that we are under the gun all the time to make sure that we pass. However, it's concerning to me that our kids in districts 1, 2, and 3, from what I'm hearing from some constituents, is that in some of these schools, there's still too much emphasis on getting ready for the STAR to the detriment of PBL, which is much more robust and kids like that kind of stuff. They'll come to school and do that kind of stuff. And the arts, which keeps a lot of our kids in school. So do you happen to know off the top of your head which schools in districts 1, 2, and 3, K through 12, do PBL and do the capstone? Okay, that'd be great. I think it'd be great for the trustees to know that. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Tights. Trustee Mathias, you had a question? Questions?
I do. I apologize. The allergies have robbed me of my voice. But what I'm wondering is 2 essential questions with project-based learning. First of all, I'm not sure the extent, to echo Trustee Tyke's question, the extent to which we have it, for instance, in District 2 schools currently. I would be very intrigued to know what efforts, if any, we have going on in District 2. But the two questions I have is, one, in light of the academic data that we are speaking about later this evening, especially with respect to writing, how much writing is involved with all of this for our students? I mean, at least in District 2, the writing schools, the writing scores are the lowest of all categories. So I'm just intrigued by the place of writing in all of this. And then the final question would be, can I just say it? The question of slackers. Anytime that you're working with group activities, you have the ambitious students and you have students who maybe express a little less ambition. How does project learning address those situations?
Well, I was gonna do the second one. So I think again, what you'll see, kind of teeing up, is that when students are authentically writing, and that their writing scores improve. Right now, we don't have per se a requirement for a writing component in PBL. Absolutely, there's in the best PBL delivery, you'll have students who are constantly writing, and again, they're authentically writing because they're journaling, they're keeping track of where they're going, they're responding to each other. Some wonderful examples of writing that's very authentic that can emerge from a PBL activity or learning experience is writing a senator, writing trustees, writing the mayor. I mean, those are where you really, because they will spend so much more time writing those letters with passion and with perfection and rewriting them than they will a star essay. And so as we grow in our own development of PBL, we'll start seeing more and more examples of that embedded into the projects.
Okay. And the question of collaboration?
Yep.
You got it.
Mm-hmm. So the question of collaboration, which is one of those skills that our employers are requesting. If you think about the way we approach instruction right now, it's very individualistic, and we test it individually. So it's very odd that we almost have to force the practice to getting people together. In a capstone situation at the high school level, I could give great examples in entrepreneurship, for example. One, where the students who are on teams to build a business, every year that we've done it, we've had students fired, in essence, from their group because they're not picking up the slack, and that is a part of the curriculum. Holding everyone accountable, how speaking up about that. I think the reality is that it has to be authentic and it has to be a real situation for those skills to come out, for those issues to be addressed. The problem is that we're not authentic in our assessment systems. So kids don't feel the pressure of having to produce when they're up against a deadline or up against colleagues and friends who are trying to work with them. Developing timelines and holding to them. Those are usually done and directed by teachers. And getting the kids to own it is the shift. And how we get kids to own it is by saying you're responsible for your work and you're responsible for your team doing their work together. And it's not going to be great the first couple of times you do it. But as this goes forward, the kids will have that structure and those skill sets to know when they need help, which is one of the things teenagers don't do very well, is say when I need help. Or I do not understand, or I can't finish because of X and Y. And they, instead of isolating themselves, they would have in this opportunity to work with others to get them through it. So it goes back to having a clear target. And the target is not a test. The target is not an individual type of assignment. We have to force this issue of getting kids to collaborate with each other, because that's what our jobs of the 21st century require us to do.
I appreciate that.
Thank you. Trustee Owens?
Thank you. I have a couple questions just feeding off what's already been spoken today. Just, is a capstone or PBL always group work? So the group piece of it is just an option down this path. So it might still be individualistic in the, okay. And then a question on the training. It's written in here that, well, in the PowerPoint, so I guess it's in that there's part 1 and part 2 learning opportunities. Since is it mandated for 5th, 8th, and 11th, or is it by choice?
It is for 5th grade teachers if they are doing the units in their content area, if you will, or if they are departmentalized, then those teachers would attend the training. If they're self-contained, then those teachers would attend the training.
Because I want to go back up to the very beginning. I think, Dr. Cruz, you said all means all, which I'm going to throw out at a training this past weekend. The superintendent has changed that statement to every student rather than all students, because it does individualize it. So just to think about, a little something to chew on. But if every student in 5th, 8th, and 11th is, and 12th, or 12th, not 11th, they're preparing in 11th, is doing this, back to Trustee Teich's earlier question, it seems every 5th, 8th, and 12th grade student in districts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 will all be doing this project this year.
Every student will. Not necessarily every teacher will have it in their classroom.
So that the school will decide potentially which teachers have to go to the training, and then others can if
Yes.
they're interested.
And we have had others that are interested at other grade levels who have attended.
Great. That's very helpful to understand. Thank you. Okay. And then principals are all required? Or at the
The
well, you'd
principals
have to
we've
have
been
all.
training at their level meetings, yes.
Okay.
And then we had it at the Summer Institute, the Learning Institute, this past summer as well.
Okay. And I'm going to go somewhere I don't love going, but I feel like we just have to get it out here. And I think Dr. Shapiro mentioned it. The authentic assessment piece of this. When you get into, so basically the two conversations we're having tonight, the dichotomy of how they work and what they mean and how parents, students, teachers, everybody feels about them could not be more opposite. And so I find it fascinating it was scheduled this way. But the pushback you will get from, let's say, the legislators in this kind of assessment is there's perhaps a conflict of interest when you have the teacher being judged really by the Board of Trustees on how many students are proficient. So the conflict would be to rate all students proficient or above. How do we manage that? How do we as a governing board not make it, make it a true assessment where we trust and not a punishment kind of deal? Where that's where end of year assessments were for the whole country at one point, and now they're a punishment tool. So I don't want us to get in that environment, but at the same time, we need to trust them and believe in the work. Is that something you can answer?
In thought, one of the issues that you have is this trust that this type of teaching will lead to better standardized test scores. And the fight that you're talking about is, does this type of learning, how do you measure it, and how do you know that it will equate? That's really the question. And the research is clear that if we give kids authentic problems to solve, and that they get engaged in the learning, that they will have a better chance of maintaining their learning beyond the one day that they learned it. And that is the key. It's trusting that this type of that's when I said before, it's a change in philosophy. That I don't do this for 3 weeks or a month and then I shift back over to the test prep for the rest. You have to trust that this kind of teaching will be much better for all students, and it is. So my answer would be, yes, that is the fight. That truly goes into everyone's mind, especially this time of year. And to have that trust and to hold on and say, yes, this is the right thing for kids. This will get us better long-term results for students and opportunities in college and career. But at the same time, it will also improve our standardized test scores. So to the pedagogy question, that is a conflict that happens all the time.
So that actually helps me a whole lot. Thank you for that explanation, because if I'm not mistaken, this board is considering not monitoring this kind of work after we'll do it this year and we'll do it next year. But it seems to be falling off a lot of our conversations for the 1920 scorecard, which has troubled me. What I think I heard Dr. Shapiro say is that as we embrace this teaching method, it becomes an action item for the superintendent versus a measurement tool of the trustee level. So that, and then we can check the work through the scores on the exams. Okay, I'm going to struggle through that, but I believe this is incredibly important work, and I, from a governing perspective, really seek advice, if you will, on how we can do the best by you in ensuring this kind of work is implemented and not get sidetracked by what the legislature requires versus what we think is important. And I just will give you a little story to go with that. Also at my training, we met some students in Galveston who were in a robotics class. And, you know, those training programs are so incredible in that you do have the teams and you have to present and you have written documentation, you have creative marketing things, you have all piece of the puzzle kind of come together. But this child was an 11th grader, and he said in 6th grade he almost dropped out of school because he could not perform. His scores were bad, his grades were bad, and he saw no future until one teacher. Teachers, you have such an important role. You can go good or bad with it, but one teacher plucked him out, said, I think you have aptitude here. Would you be interested? Put him in a robotics class. Now all of his grades have risen because he sees the relevancy in the learning. So I applaud this district for taking this direction and taking it seriously, regardless of what our scorecard says. I hope it doesn't go away. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. There's 2 more questions. Secretary Cowan and then Trustee Tice.
Okay. Thank you all very, very much. You've really put a lot of, obviously you've worked on this and really trying to settle it all out. It's funny because when my kids were in high school still, and of course now they're out of college, we talked about this at our CAC. And in 9th grade at the time, World Geography did group projects. And I was begging our staff to teach our kids, first of all, besides mastering this, but just how to work in groups together. And my daughter, who was a business major in particular at A&M in one of her fields, had to work in groups. And still by college, a lot of kids couldn't work in groups together, and there was always someone who pulled the extra weight. She said it was her all the time. And now she is working for a large company and still seeing all of this. And so it's just so very valuable, and I really appreciate it. I think the one question I had was when we're talking about the capstone courses, Dr. Shapiro, and that is, how does that look? I guess when we read our board update, it was all focused through CTE, through career and technology, and I just didn't know how that worked for folks who were more English-based, or some other subject was their thing that they would want to do a project on. Is that allowed, or what does it look like? I guess, and I also just want to ask one other specific question, and that is, for our International Baccalaureate students, I was a little bit concerned because they have just come off a 4,000-word essay that they really put a whole summer and plus months into. And I didn't know how that would balance, or if they're still going to do both or not. So I was just curious.
So the second answer to your question is absolutely any IB terminal project would count for it. Absolutely, and if you look at the definition, it meets all the criteria. When the high school principals got together, we made absolutely sure that it was the banks of the river were wide enough that we can bring in a number of these programs like AGS, right? So we didn't want to start from zero, and we also wanted to honor the work that is already going on, as said before, in our district. To answer question one, no, CTE is one of those easy wins to say that they generally tend to end in a capstone course where they're getting a license or they're going to an internship or they have a product to produce. So those are great starting points. But as you could see across our district, in ethnic studies, for example, they're doing projects similar to this. And I see this as a rolling as we get better and better at it, and rolling and the definition gets out there and teachers massage what this means to them. We're going to see great many projects that we're not even thinking of right now. And the question is not to stifle that or try to put it in a box and say this is the only thing that counts. Really leaving that definition loose enough so that we can give the kids honest choice and to do how they do. And really the idea of a capstone is reflection on their work, whether that be advocating for a cause or tutoring or whatever the case may be. And I think that as long as we keep the definition loose enough, we'll be able to measure whether they met the competency and whether they can communicate that.
Good. Well, thank you for just confirming that. I think you're absolutely right, that we can't even suggest what every child would want to put into his capstone course or project-based learning. So, and do you imagine then at 5th grade, it's going to be more larger groups, a classroom managing this together?
I think in the beginning it will, and that's what I've seen so far, but there have been situations where kids want to break out on their own, and so that it's like, go for it and let's work on that. So we're not holding kids back, but to teach the skills of how to work together and how to reflect on the work that's being done, yes, that is the approach we're taking right now.
Thank you so much.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I just wanted to ask on the way we measure this is percent proficient. So we're also going to, you're going to need to tell us how many kids are participating. Okay.
So the denominator will be all 8th grade, all 5th grade, all 12th grade. The numerator will be proficient or mastery. So we'll include both on that first that first rubric. So it would be including both of them. Mm-hmm. And I will say it's not going to be pretty at the beginning. It isn't, because this test, it's not about efficiency. So multiple choice test, true, false, those are about efficiency. Read it, give me the answer, it's yes or no. Whenever we do open-ended responses, and we'll get into that in an MOI, it really speaks much more to the depth and complexity of the standard that's being taught and that students should learn. So this is not, it's not going to look pretty. It's just one nice little score that rolls up and we get everybody's scores on one day. And it really shouldn't be. Not authentic learning. Not what we're trying to get to here. We could do that and then do it something like this and then just send out, now kids now do the multiple choice test. We could do that. Is it going to mean something? It probably won't. We'll do it. But I'm not saying you're requesting that. It's interesting your point that about how the dichotomy of this topic compared to the very next one that we're going to do, which one is certainly tests some knowledge, right? But it's efficiency in the way the scores come aggregated back. But nonetheless, your question, the denominator is the total enrollment. The numerator will be proficient or mastery. Mm-hmm. Just look at those things. We talk about reflects, evaluates, can speak to. Those are all the higher level the student expectations that are essential that kids have to do every single day. And just imagine if a student in first block, second, third, and fourth never does that. When do they then? So nobody says we have to, but we do. Just to your point about the scorecard, this is something we say is essential for our students.
Thank you.
I hate to be one of those people that say back in the day, but back in the day when I was being educated in Texas schools, we did this. So we kind of regressed. And I went to Texas schools 1958 to 1970. And all of my education was in Texas schools. 5 years in Del Rio, Texas, and the rest of it here in Austin ISD. And we did those kinds of projects. So we've regressed. And we won't go into why that's happened, but we all know. I think we know why that's happened.
It's important. It's why, because of our next conversation is why it's happening.
Yes. Well, it's happening because of the over-reliance on standardized testing. All right. So I'm going to recommend perhaps that our astute Deborah Reedy and her team figure out a way to connect students' STAR scores to how well they did on their PBLs and their capstones in some way. Perhaps we can gather that data. So if somebody asks us from, I don't know, the Pink Dome, why we're doing this and how it's going to help them on their STAR test, then we would have that data available. And I think we could do that somewhat easily if we have a head start. I have a heads up about that. And then I have a question about how many universities, do you have a sense, any one of you, how many universities have capstone projects as part of their required curriculum? Because I know my two children, one of them at Texas State, one eventually at UT, had them. So
I can only speak for one school that Dr. Cruz doesn't want me to talk about.
You can talk about Fordham. Please, I'd love to know more. That's where you graduated from, so you...
Yeah, but that's not where you got his doctorate, but we all know.
She is going through that process, senior seminar, and I think that's something that I can get those, or at least our Texas area, how many have a senior seminar or reflective course.
And I think that's a national trend, am I correct? Because students learn better when they're actually giving some real life problem to solve, and then they're more engaged. It just makes sense. Now we have the data, you've alluded to research, to show that really does work. It increases learning. And then also, there are some universities that don't even require a standardized test as part of their admissions anymore because they've matured and they realize those standardized tests don't really reflect the learning abilities of students. They are a snapshot in time, and depending on how good a test taker you are, how you felt that day, et cetera, sometimes, unfortunately, can determine your entire academic career, which is, some universities have recognized that is a bogus way to do things. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you. Trustee Anderson.
Sorry, just a quick question. So some of the things you've talked about with PBL and with capstone projects is how much more the students seem to learn from them, being that they are better able to connect the dots between what they're learning in the classroom and how things get applied in real life, as you will. So given that sort of shift in how we're teaching, are we also looking at other ways? And if so, if you could maybe provide a few examples, and it doesn't necessarily have to be tonight, but how are we looking at other curriculum and trying to make those same connections for kids? Like, I'll use math as a prime example. My kids have taken AP math classes and done 50 problems a night, but they don't necessarily understand why they need to know algebra or calculus, and there's zero connection for them to what they learn in the classroom and how things get applied in real life. So are we also looking to shift other sort of core curriculum in that direction? And if so, if you could sort of give me an idea of what that might look like.
Yes, we are, absolutely. And I think that this is one of those moments where you see something in a scorecard and it's a gift because it's pushing the system towards that. But our yearly planning guides are tied to, now we have teaching planning guides, and also, which were really kind of a teacher's guide to that TEK and breaking that TEK apart, and then always relating that to for like real world and authentic situations for students. And so as we continue kind of to shift our curriculum more into the modular curriculum and blend, and that's just going to take some time, it's transformational. But as we do that, we absolutely connect. Our literacy plan is really truly connecting again to integrated reading and writing, and not teaching things separately, but how can you have true authentic responses to text. And then again, the hunger and desire to read expository text comes naturally from inquiry learning. So we're building it in our curriculum and in our resources. It's always around the professional learning that accompanies those resources.
Thank you. The next item, thank you all. The next item on the agenda is a discussion on benchmark middle of year. This discussion is part of Core Belief 1. All students will graduate college, career, and life ready. And board Goal 3, all students will be prepared to graduate on time and ready for college and career. Dr. Cruz.
Okay. Thank you, Vice President Rodriguez and board members. As our staff members come up to be organized. We're going to be working off the presentation, Core Belief 1, middle of year, MOI, results and response. So it looks very similar to the previous one, but it's actually the text is different on this one. We're going to just sort of pull up, here we go, pull up this presentation. So we'll have a few of our colleagues presenting the information, but as resource we have, we'll make sure everybody introduces themselves. We were able to get a few principals. I know I've seen at least three. There's Marvelia, 3 and Lauro. So, and we saw Brandy earlier. So we have a few principals here as well. We're going to start off with introductions. What we want to do is go through MOI results, where we are right now, and what an MOI, what it actually tells us, what it informs us around students and student learning. So with that, we're going to start off the presentation. Deborah.
Good evening. Good evening, Board of Trustees and Dr. Cruz. This item will, as Dr. Cruz said, will include an overview of the benchmark assessment and then a discussion of the data. And so in our district, we refer to our benchmark assessment as the middle of year assessment, or the MOI. The MOIs are assessments that are created by the curriculum specialists with some help from a small assessment team. And we create a MOI for all of the STAR tested grades and subjects, and then additionally for 6th and 7th grade social studies. The purpose of the MOI is formative in nature, so it differs from the STAR. It assesses the taught curriculum, and it's aligned to those yearly planning guides that Dr. Goodnow referenced earlier. Kind of what we use these for is to identify the standards that the students haven't mastered, and then we use that to guide instruction for differentiation, for intervention, for those formative purposes. It should be noted that the STAR blueprint differs from our MOIs, right? We get a STAR blueprint from the state, and it'll tell us for each reporting category within the TEKS how many readiness standards, how many supporting standards, and then it'll list all the standards in the TEKS, so maybe there's 14, and then it'll tell us on the STAR, we're going to test 8 of those, and you don't know which 8, but you get that blueprint, right? We're not able to create a benchmark that looks like that STAR blueprint because we haven't taught all of the standards. We give the writing benchmark following the 12th week of instruction, and then we give the rest of the benchmarks following the 18th week of instruction. So we're only about halfway through the year. We've taught roughly half of the standards. So these benchmarks, aside from being formative, whereas STAR is summative, they're shorter, they don't cover all the standards, they are not able to follow the blueprint, and therefore it should be noted that they are not predictive of STAR performance. What we have for you within your packet tonight are 4 attachments. We have the elementary benchmark results in attachment 1, and the cover page is a simple sort of summary of the findings. Attachment 2 is the same thing for middle school. Attachment 3 is the same thing for high school. And then within attachment 4, we have bubble charts. And so I think the bubble charts create a nice visual for you. Basically what we've done along the y-axis is to put we created a cut mark. So for example, at elementary and middle school, we looked at 55% correct. So the y-axis represents the percentage of students who met or exceeded that 55% cut mark, and the x-axis indicates the percent of students on the campus who are economically disadvantaged. The color of the bubble represents whether or not the campus is Title I or non-Title I, and the size of the bubble represents the percentage of overall testers. So it gives you a sense of the size of the campus. And so with that, I'm not going to sort of speak through the data. I'm sure you can read those summaries, and you've had the bubble charts now for a while. If you have any questions about the data themselves, I'm happy to answer those. My colleagues will be talking more specifically about findings by campus and the intervention strategies that are in place going forward as a result of these data.
So I think we'll pause for just a moment and introduce, let you know who's with us tonight. My name is Gilbert Hicks. I'm the Associate Superintendent for Area 2 Elementary Schools, and we have a number of members of the teaching and learning team here behind me, as well as 3 principals, 1 from middle school, high school, and elementary school here with us to respond to any comments or questions that you may have.
Okay. So do you want to start with Dr. Kaufman, introduce themselves?
Well,
I'm David Kaufman. I'm the Executive Director for Multilingual Education.
I'm still Lisa Goodnow.
Sandra Creswell.
Terrence Eaton.
Craig Shapiro.
Randy Joseph, Principal of Aviance. Jean Bainey, Executive Director Specialist.
Laura Davalos, Principal of Pico Early College Prep.
Nikki Schofield, Academic Dean at Burnett Middle School.
Marbelia De La Rosa, Principal at Burnett Middle School.
Mary Alvidas, one of the 2 Area 2 Executive Directors.
Betty Jenkins, Area 2 Executive Director number 2.
Martha Doolittle from the Department of Research and Evaluation.
Ray Garcia, Middle School Office. Byron Hurst, High School Office.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah.
So a lot of support here tonight. Okay, so what I'd like to do next is just look at the overall district data observations and show you that there are some trends that some are common to all 3 levels and some are unique. But in general, at the elementary level, and we're focusing on language arts and math, inferencing is a skill that is one that we have to revisit quite often throughout. Well, we revisit it all the time. It's scaffolded from grade level to grade level, and it's one that students struggle with. And you'll find that as a common struggle in elementary, middle, and high school. And summarizing and word meaning are 2 of the other ones at the elementary language arts level. In mathematics at elementary school, the processing skills are extremely important, and those are numerous. And you can read what some of those other ones are there, but that's very common at all 3 levels as well. At middle school language arts, again, I mentioned inferencing, and they have identified through their data review that using textual evidence to support understanding is a issue at that level that they're revisiting as a response to their MOI data. Middle school math, geometry is common across grade levels as an issue as well. And at high school, you see inferencing once again as a common theme. And then for high school in the mathematics area, Algebra 1 in particular, those 3 issues that are, those 3 skills that are listed are common trends that students struggle with in Algebra 1. So as a result of the analysis of the data, there is an immediate response that comes from each one of the levels. And there are some high yield strategies that we look at to respond to the data. In elementary school, for reading and writing, one of our biggest responses, it's an expectation throughout the entire year, but then it's a response because we really ramp it up after we see the data, is to emphasize text processing strategies at the elementary school to ensure that comprehension is the key. That's one of the 5 components of a good reading program, is to ensure that students comprehend, and text processing is one way to do that at a higher level. And then we double down on our small group instruction at the elementary level. As a result of the data analysis, we find out which TEKS or SEs, student expectations, are the ones that were most troubling, and we emphasize those. For mathematics, the use of multi-step problems to ensure that students are doing more synthesis and analysis and application of the skills that they've learned is extremely important. We want to be sure that we're not isolating and teaching discrete skills that are not put together and compacted in such a way that students are able to solve multi-step problems. So we really practice those at a higher degree as we ramp up towards the time that students are going to be assessed. And then in both reading, well, in all 4 subject areas, actually at all 3 levels, the spiral review of student expectations that have previously been taught is extremely important. We don't want to assume that something that was taught on September the 1st is going to be remembered in May. So we do revisit those skills and try to apply those to other SEs as well, cross-curricularly and intracurricularly as well. And at the middle school level for reading and writing, they have really doubled down on the talk, read, talk, write strategy through active reading and connected writing, and building stamina through our continued emphasis on the structured independent reading program that they have been working on all year. We have been at every single level in all grade levels, but really making sure that that stamina piece is there. Students are expected to read in a timed period, and they need to, and we want to be sure that students have built up their stamina to do that. And then reading across content areas is extremely important as well, and iStation at the middle school level and Lexile levels, and the comparisons that are being made there to ensure that students are progressing. And in mathematics, again, the process standards and the campus-wide problem-solving process are at focus. At the high school level, some of the overall strategies really involve the power standards and a spiral review of the SEs, as I've mentioned before, the student expectations, and then they really double down on the in-class differentiated groupings as well as a result of the data analysis. All of this is as a result of the data analysis to ensure that we are responding immediately to what we see. Okay, so that's what happens immediately, but we also wanted to discuss our long-term responses to literacy and what's going to happen in 2018, 2019. Literacy is a strong focus in the district, and we're entering year 3 of the literacy plan, and so we'll be implementing phase 3, which is an introduction to the writing workshop model. We will continue our focus on years 1 and 2 because we want to ensure that we implement those with fidelity, and we continue to really become stronger with our structured independent reading processes and our active reading and our connected writing strategies that we're utilizing in our classrooms. We'll continue to deliver professional learning regarding better implementation with fidelity of our ISIP, which is our assessment system for reading in K through 8, and use of iStation. And then we will also continue to focus on capacity building for our literacy lead teams. Those are the individuals that receive professional learning as a group throughout the district and then take that learning back to campus, and they become trainers of trainers to ensure that we are turning around what it is that we're learning and able to touch more people at our campuses with the professional learning. And finally, the use of integrated mini lessons and mentor text or exemplar text is another way that we will introduce our readers and writers workshop in phase 3 of the literacy plan. So with that, Deborah is going to take us through a brief explanation of the recent AIC research on dual language and bilingual education.
Our Department of Research and Evaluation continued to evaluate AISD's bilingual and ESL programs as we are required to do by state law. So we collect feedback from principals, we examine data, we analyze student outcomes, we summarize staff training. We also work with the multilingual education team to sort of examine program implementations and make observations around that. And so this next slide provides a couple of highlights that were written, that came from reports written by Dr. Martha Doolittle, who's with us tonight. And she's our bilingual ESL and all things dual language and everything else resident expert, and she's really quite excellent. But I have reference in this slide to 2 reports authored by Dr. Doolittle, and the first of those is the 2017 Elementary Star Reading Results for Mixed Language Classrooms. So, you know, when we talk about mixed language classrooms, we're talking about classrooms that have a mixture of students where some of those students are in the bilingual program and some of those students are not in the bilingual program. And so as a part of this report, Dr. Doolittle and her team looked at along with the state laws and a research brief, and they also did a pretty extensive analysis of the AISD's 2017 STAR reading. They looked specifically in grades 3 through 5, and they compared the mixed classrooms to the non-mixed classrooms. So basically, they looked at every student, grade 3 through 5. They looked at their reading results. They tied that student to their reading teacher. They looked at the students in that reading teacher's classroom and determined whether or not it was a mixed classroom. And so the first finding we share with you tonight is that most students pass STAR reading at a higher rate in non-mixed language classrooms than did similar students in mixed language classrooms. So this sort of unfavorable effect, if you will, was observed in our English learners as well as our non-English learners. So in short, being in a mixed language classroom, those students performed at a lower rate on STAR reading than did those in a non-mixed classroom. The other report, or the other finding I have from you, is from a second report also written by Dr. Doolittle and her team, where in December of 2017, Dr. Kaufman and also Dr. Doolittle's team met with elementary principals, and they put together some focus groups. And so from those focus groups, they sort of talked about, you know, what would make sense for our bilingual and ESL program choices for school year 18-19. So the purpose was to get feedback and sort of inform those decisions. And so sort of what came out of that is included within the report, and we'll provide you with the link to the reports. They're on our website. But in short, you know, the kinds of things that they really wanted to see us do was to implement a program that fit with the campus and with the student needs, that sort of one-size-fits-all didn't work in all cases as well as it could. Sort of another big finding was that we needed to provide adequate staffing, and honestly that we sort of needed to move away from this notion of mixed classrooms because it was clear that it wasn't a good model for us. They also asked that we support campuses, you know, around providing information and choice and resources. And lastly, that we needed to keep the parents and also the community informed. So again, those are just some sort of high-level findings from two recent reports from Dr. Doolittle and her team. And we'll send you the link to those full reports for your reading.
So with that, the long-term response to that information is that, yes, we would like to eliminate mixed language classrooms, but to do so with a no-cost solution and to supplement supplemental staffing with existing funds. As Deborah alluded to, that that the elimination of mixed classrooms would have a beneficial effect on our data, we believe, based on the information that we've received from DRE. The implementation of a school-wide 2A dual language.
Maybe there's no new cost.
No,
there is a cost to eliminate mixed classrooms.
No new cost.
And we're moving funding from some areas to another to reduce the number of mixed classrooms.
Right. It's no.
So there's still a cost.
No new costs.
So I'm getting lost. We have a lot of different language, two-way dual language, ESL. I'm confused. Are you saying any kind of mixed language environment, And so if you are a Spanish speaker and it's all Spanish speakers, you are doing well on this test. It's when you mix it in with the English that neither group does well on this test. Is that what I'm understanding you to say?
So the finding is that when we have a classroom, when we look at all the kids in grades 3 through 5, and we look at their reading star scores, whether they took the test in Spanish, whether they took it in English, all the 3 through 5 kids, we looked at those kids and then we put them into two groups. Those who were in a mixed classroom and those that were in a non-mixed classroom. So by mixed, regardless of the language. And what we find is that those in a non-mixed classroom perform better than those in a mixed classroom.
Can I just ask, was that statistically significant, or did you do some kind of regression analysis on that, or did you just straight up look at the data and that's what popped out?
I think it's straight up look at the data, but I will refer to Dr.
Which is not statistically significant. So you're relying on non-statistically significant data on a conclusion. Yeah, I'll
okay. We'll have Dr. Doolittle come up. Dr. Doolittle come up, and then Dr. Kaufman. I may ask you to because we're saying mixed language, but it's mixed instructional delivery. It's an instructional design that's different, not the language. So there's something there. One is just language of instruction, but then there's a mixed classroom that has it's something different. I'm gonna ask David to come on up and just give us a quick definition of one-way dual language, two-way dual language, and a mixed classroom. And ESL.
The only thing I was going to say is we did not do a significance test, but I can do that. So it's not actually correct to say that it's not significant. We just hadn't done the test yet, but I'd be happy to.
I think when you change something and you're going to administer it, you kind of want to know that it's statistically significant. So yes, that would be great.
So when we're talking about the mixed language classrooms, we're really looking at the program delivery. And so in a dual language program or in a late exit bilingual program, there are times of the day when the instruction is in Spanish, and there are times of the day when the instruction is in English. For our students in all English programs, our non-Ls typically, our students who aren't English learners, just our students who are native English speakers in a English-only program, their instruction is in English all day long. When you take students who are in an English-only program and combine them with students in a bilingual program with the same teacher, that teacher is now expected to teach part of the day in English and part of the day in Spanish for this group, but the entire day in English for this group. That's what creates the mixed, what we call a mixed classroom. It's not necessarily, it's not restricted to dual language. You can have a mixed classroom in a late exit program as well. The difference is that in a dual language classroom, because the program by design keeps the students in at least 50% of the day in Spanish up through 5th grade, that mixed classroom becomes a problem throughout the K through 5 experience. In a late exit program, it's not unacceptable to start to mix students in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade when your instruction starts to lean more heavily towards English. And then you can start to make some differentiation according to language level. But it's programmatically, it's most challenging in a dual language classroom. But the report that Dr. Doolittle put together looked at mixed classrooms in all instructional settings.
Just, did we look then what happens by 8th grade, if there was any, did we continue that up through 8th grade or just ended at 5th?
So this was a one-year analysis looking at last year's STAR scores. We have other reports looking at the long-term effects of dual language and other reports looking at the longitudinal data for students. But this was a one-shot look at, is our assumption, right? Because what we hear from principals and teachers is that mixed classrooms make it very difficult to implement a dual language program. And we hear from one of our consultants who works with us on dual language that you can't do dual language with a mixed classroom. So we wanted to back up that the anecdotal stories around the challenges with data, and so it was a one-year analysis to look at it in this situation. Further analysis can certainly be conducted.
Okay.
So does that also take into consideration whether you had a certified bilingual education teacher in the classroom or not?
So as I mentioned, it was a one-time quick look at the overall data for the year. We can conduct further analyses to look more at the other factors and the variables that could contribute to that. But at this time, the analysis was simply looking at the performance of students in the mixed classrooms versus not mixed classrooms.
And so there was no trend, there's no trend analysis as well. It was just off of one straight year.
No, sir, it was not a regression analysis. It was
Just
not
one straight year.
It was looking at 1 year data at the effects.
Yeah.
Well, no, did we let them finish?
Yeah. So just finally, professional development is extremely important in the long-term response, and we're focused on biliteracy, sheltered instruction, and language development for that professional learning. And then targeting our support, supplemental support, and differentiating that support to recent immigrants is extremely important in the long-term response as well. So with that, we have the members of our team and here to respond to any comments that you might have.
Trustee Wagner and then Trustee Teish.
So I think one of the things that keeps coming up from me on the dual language piece is how are we evaluating our dual language practices longitudinally, because I know we've had so many changes in the way that we've delivered curriculum and the types of programs that we've used over the last several years. So I think one of the things I'm wondering, I mean, to Trustee Rodriguez's point that we're only looking at this for that one snapshot year, how are we making sure that we're carrying that through and evaluating our practices over time to make sure that we're really heading in the right direction, so to speak?
I can let Dr. Doolittle provide more information about the specifics if you'd like, but we are, through the Department of Research and Evaluation, also looking at longitudinal studies of students who are identified as being in a dual language program compared to being in the other programs. And so that work is ongoing. It's tracking the cohorts of students from the first cohort who's now in 8th grade and the second cohort who's now in 7th grade. And then there's also other longitudinal looks at the data.
Every year we have an evaluation plan, and it's posted on our website, and it covers all of the particular analyses and data that we look at. And so for the bilingual ESL programs, we do look at longitudinal analysis for dual language as well as the other programs, ESL, late exit, and we look at all Ls. So we have produced reports last year that included longitudinal analysis of students by grade, by program. We will do that again this year. We're also trying to get a measure of what's going on in the classrooms through some observations by bilingual specialists to get a sense of what they're seeing. And because you referenced that the dual language program has changed somewhat, it's also, can be implemented in different ways at different campuses. We want to get a sense of the degree to which campuses are trying to meet the basic requirements of implementing the program. So we are gathering information also from principals and teachers, and plan to continue looking at all the data that we can. I hope that helps answer your question.
So we do have the longitudinal reports. Today, and the one that we reference is the 1 year data. So I'm just thinking, I know we've done at least, I think we had maybe one or two, I don't remember exactly, but I know there's been one that was released maybe at the beginning of this year, if I remember, that looked at students who have been enrolled in dual language over time. But just right now, they reference just the one, but we can look at the statistical significance.
And that longitudinal data is specifically for English language learners, though, not for students who are accessing dual language programs as a means of enrichment and
in the report, the bilingual annual report, it's mostly focused on English learners.
Okay.
But we do have students who are native English speakers who are participating in the two-way dual language, and they are included in that report.
Thank you, Trustee Teish, and then Trustee Anderson, and then Trustee Mathias.
Okay, so some of the stuff I'm going to ask, I don't expect an answer tonight, and I'll cue you as to what that is, because some of these are really hard. So the first observation has to do with what's just been discussed. As long as we are assessed by the state with one test, and that's what we have to work towards, basically, to make sure that our campuses don't go IR, then we are constrained in the richness, I think, of academic offerings that we can give to our kids to a certain degree. So nobody disputes that learning 2 languages or 3 languages is extremely important to cognitive development of children. However, if you have a statewide test upon which campuses are rated A through F, et cetera, then, and you have limited resources, as we do in this district because of recapture to some degree, then it makes sense, in a perverse sort of a way, that a lot of your attention is focused on making sure those kids can pass that test in English. So I struggle all the time because with this particular issue, because I value the fact that I have another language, and I know many of our parents value that too and want their children and deliberately enroll their children in our dual language programs and everything, but there is that constraint by the state. So the anger that comes because of that constraint, I think, should be directed towards advocacy, towards getting the state to change its mind. So that's one comment. Number 2, we are always in a churn with our statewide evaluations because the state keeps changing the standards, and you can't really compare. It's always apples to oranges and that kind of thing. So that's another frustration. Once again, if anybody's feeling that frustration or anger, then channel that anger and that energy into some advocacy regarding the people who make these decisions. That brings me to, once more, wishing that we had just using our own measures of proficiency in reading and math, since those are the 2 core subjects. I know we do these MOIs, and that we've written these MOIs, that staff has written these MOIs downtown, and then they are disseminated to our campuses. However, it's my understanding that some campuses don't prepare for these MOIs. They just give the MOIs, and they just move on. And then they rely on what their instruction to prepare the students for the STAR, because the MOIs, while we say they don't predict to the STAR, they do. I'm assuming they're still written in the same format as the STAR. Otherwise, I don't think we would be giving them at all. So I think that we need to be honest in saying that basically teachers are using these MOIs, the results of these MOIs, to kind of predict which kids are going to make it on the STAR. And there are actually 6 different bubble levels on the STAR now based on Domain 1. I have it written down here somewhere. We've got the did not meet, we've got the approaching, the meets, and the masters, and we've got bubbles at each one of those levels that we have to, bubble kids, I should say, at each one of those levels that principals and teachers have to direct resources towards. So if kids are struggling, and that's another question, if kids are struggling based on, MOI results or previous STAR results or whatever, principals and teachers have to make a decision about what kinds of resources are going to be directed to these struggling kids. So one of my questions has to do with how does the Office of Academics target support to struggling students? And we know that economics contribute to disparities among our students. So what can AISD do to address those disparities? I mean, this is a huge monetary question, and it's also a training question in my mind. So how does the Office of Academics target support to struggling students, knowing that we have basically 6 sets of bubble students to deal with, not as in my day we had 1 set of bubble students. These are the students who just about pass from did not meet standard 2 approaching, and then approaching to meets, and meets to masters. That's I know that's what teachers and principals look at, or they should be looking at on campuses. So that's one question. You don't have to answer it tonight. It's kind of complex. And then again, we know that economics contribute to the disparities in the achievement levels of our students in this town. We know that. So what are we doing to address those disparities, or that economic question? And then another question is, I don't think we believe as trustees and Dr. Cruz and all the staff here and the staff at our schools, we don't believe that the socioeconomic level of our students best predicts their academic success. I don't think we believe that. So but yet we view the data in terms of socioeconomic levels. And I'm looking at the bubbles, which I really, really appreciate because I can do the bubbles better than I can do the columns of numbers. And I'm just, I'm struck by, in all the areas, our Title I schools are the ones that tend to fall in what we call the danger zone, below, in my opinion, below the 60% line that's going across there, because we're looking at the percent of achieving at least 55% correct on the MOI. This is the MOI now, and the percent of testers who are economically disadvantaged. So that's what we're focusing on, is our economically disadvantaged students. So is this the right way to view the data? It's just a question, because that's what we seem to be fixated on, even though we agree that it's not the socioeconomic level that determines the success of our kids. I'm going to say it's the training of our teachers and the leadership of our principals, and then certain programs that really establish a good foundation in mathematics and reading. Some specific questions also. We've got some glaring issues of kids who are really down below the 40% line, the 20% line in our Title I schools, in math and in reading at the elementary level, then at the middle school level, and then at the high school level. What are we doing to address those problems? And once again, a lot of those schools are Title I schools, economically disadvantaged kids, who are quite capable of learning at high levels, but we've still got problems with their achievement based on the MOI, based on this MOI. And this is not supposed to predict to the star, but we all know it does. It does. In my opinion, it does. So a final question is that regarding our L's in middle school, we've had a lot of those English language learners when they arrive in 6th grade. We've had a lot of them, at least in District 1, 2, and 3 schools, for 3 or 4 years in our elementary schools. And they're still not achieving at the levels that we would like them to achieve at. So once again, there's a foundation problem. Some schools do it better than others. You can see the outlying schools on these bubble charts. I'm not going to go over all of them. We also know that there have been some programs instituted at some of the District 1 and 2 and 3 schools that have laid some strong foundations in math and reading. And once again, I'm going to ask why those programs are not used all over those 3 districts. I hate to just, I don't mean anything bad by not saying districts 4, 5, 6, and 7, but I'm primarily focused on districts 1, 2, and 3 because that's where you have a lot of schools who are struggling, that's where our IR schools are. What are we doing at those schools where we have those English language learners for at least 3 or 4 years in elementary school, and yet they're getting to middle school and they still cannot function, I guess, according to STAR standards in reading and math. So those are my concerns. We still, it's just, how are we allocating resources? What's going on? Leadership is a big part of it. Principal training, teacher training. I know there's been turnover at some of our districts 1, 2, and 3 schools, but I'm really concerned that we still haven't figured out how to do this. How to get these kids, at least from what I'm seeing on this MOI, because these are kind of the same from year to year. There's usually the same outliers for elementary school. And we've got some struggling middle schools. What are we doing differently? How are we allocating resources so that we make sure that these kids improve? And my basic concern, I think most parents' concerns, are that kids can read, write, and get out and do use those skills in their other content areas by the time they get through high school, so that they're successful in post-secondary education. I don't expect answers to those tonight. I'm just very concerned that we still have, for want of a better word, kind of a mediocre, well, not mediocre, that's a vague term. We have a situation in districts 1, 2, and 3 schools where kids are not getting the foundation they need. And I know that's of concern. I know they're difficult, but I know that they are more they are more expensive to educate because of their language status, or perhaps because of their economic status. But some schools are doing it; they're educating them at high levels, and some schools are not. And I'm not going to pull out those schools and name them here. I think everybody knows who they are. So my recommendation when I ask that resource question is target those schools, and I know we have this plan, we've triaged and we've got this plan, target those schools that are not making the standards, and make sure that the leadership is as strong as possible, train those principals. And I'm going to say once again, if you don't have collaboration between your principals and your teachers, teachers don't feel like they're being listened to by principals. Teachers feel like it's a top-down situation from central office and from their principals. If teachers are being asked to drill and kill their kids all the time to the exclusion of the arts and to other things that enrich kids' lives, then I say that you need to do some soul searching and figure out a way to stop that. And I'm getting concerns from teachers at District 1, 2, and 3 schools that there are some principals who are still uber focused on the star and the results, and I completely understand why. But these principals are dictating to these teachers rather than asking the teachers to collaborate with them. I've encouraged the teachers to report on the anonymous hotline. I'm going to throw that out there again. If you have a complaint about this, it's very effective if you go to the anonymous hotline and you're very specific about what you are concerned about. And the anonymous hotline is anonymous, particularly if you do it online. So that's a long, kind of a semi-rambling way of addressing these concerns. I'm not going to go through each one of these charts, and some of my trustees may want to do that and may want to point out schools. I would prefer that we just address the major questions. How are we allocating resources? How are we addressing all these kids at these different bubble points vis-a-vis the 4 areas that the STAR tests? And then just acknowledge that the MOI is a STAR predictor. It is. And it might be better just to go ahead and use release stars. And I happen to know that the MOI is written based on release stars anyway, so there we go. No answers are expected tonight. My other trustees may want answers, but I'm going to wait, and then I will check up later.
Thank you, Trustee. I think we have a board education session coming up on bilingual education as well, Trustee Anderson.
Thanks. I don't know about you all, but my head's already spinning. I have a couple of things that continually make me challenged in trying to really understand where we are with dual language, because, if you think back to sort of the early years of implementation, we were much more heavily challenged with fidelity, with huge variances in, the models that were rolled out, 50-50 here, 70-20 or 70-30 here, 80-20 here, and having a lot of inconsistency across the board. And I think that we've made a lot of progress in that area. But so for me, that's why it's so hard to wrap my head around snapshot data, because we're not comparing cohorts to cohorts. And even amongst individual schools, there have been there's been a lot of progress made with regard to fidelity, whether it's additional professional development, whether it's resource support, whether it's consistency in ensuring that everybody is operated under, again, whatever the percentages that we would ideally like to see in dual language classrooms. The other thing that I find particularly challenging when it comes to this is it still seems like we're continuing to compare students that are learning 2 languages simultaneously with the same benchmarks that you would expect from a student simply learning 1. And a lot of the research shows that their milestones are going to be different. And I understand from a state accountability perspective, we don't necessarily have a choice, but I think from an internal perspective, I would like to see how our students are performing based on the milestones that the research suggests is appropriate for kids learning 2 languages at one time. And so I guess when I'm sort of thinking through what does future trend analysis look like, how can we look at things more in terms of cohort progress and looking at some of those variables at the individual campus levels that have improved fidelity, that improved the level of district support in both PD and resource allocations, but then also, not necessarily simply comparing them to where 3rd and 5th graders are that are simply English language, native English language speakers, for example, but providing sort of both statistics. This is how they have performed on STAR tests, but at the same time, this is what their milestones should be from 3rd to 5th grade, and this is where they are then in 5th grade. Actually comparing the same cohorts as much as possible. I know there's, migration to some extent, but if there's a way to do that, I think, at least for me, that would provide a more consistent comparison of apples to apples, as opposed to looking at a different group of kids each year. I know that for the most part, you're talking about kids that have entered a program in, at least for the native English speakers at the pre-K or K level, but we may have some in and out migration or some in-migration that differs slightly with our native Spanish speakers. And so again, just trying to get more of an apples to apples comparison wherever possible, and to ensure that we're also considering that over the, 9 years now, I think, from the first year of dual language, that we're also accounting for the fact that we had some significant challenges in the beginning that we've had to adjust for, and some at more campuses consistently than others. Also, teacher turnover, administrator turnover, and administrator buy-in, for that matter. There was a time of day where we said you're going to do dual language, as opposed to, as we're doing the middle school and high school programs, it's, is there both administrator and teacher support to do it? That's very different from how things started. So I think that played a factor, especially in the early years, in terms of whether or not it was successful. And so if there's a way to do that in the future trend analysis, I think that would be at least more helpful for me, so that I can see more of a correlation between, as opposed to looking at snapshots of different cohorts of kids, how are our kids who have actually consistently been in the program actually progressing, and are they making the milestones that they should, not just according to the state accountability, but also to what the research indicates that they should be at.
Thank you, Trustee. Trustee Mathias? Or did you? Did
you like
y'all
a
want to
response to that,
respond?
or?
Yeah. Did you all want to respond?
It doesn't have to be right now. I know that was kind of a different way of looking at things, and so again, a lot of it is consideration of future trend analysis or future programmatic evaluations, and looking at some of the different factors, and looking at more of a cohort to cohort as opposed to a snapshot type.
Yeah. If I may comment briefly, I think you identified very clearly some of the challenges that have been, but in doing so, you also, I think, allow me to take note of the growth and the learning that has occurred in the district. And so it's our 8th year of implementation right now, and there's been tremendous capacity developing among teachers and instructional specialists, such that we're able to evolve the program into something that can be implemented more in tune with the unique needs of Austin, rather than overlaying a program onto all schools in a certain way. So the steps that we're taking do attempt to adjust towards the unique conditions of each campus, while still staying true to our commitment to providing a bilingual, and wherever conditions avail themselves, a dual language program for our students. The evaluation that Dr. Doolittle and her office are conducting are starting to consider the longitudinal piece, looking at students who've been here since 1st grade, looking at students who've been in the program since 3rd grade, looking at ways to track over time the students who are in it consistently. So those things are ongoing, and we can certainly provide further updates on that.
Absolutely, because I agree with you. I don't think that snapshot results necessarily articulate all of the progress that we have made. And a lot of the things that we've been able to implement to address a lot of the issues in the early years. And it's obviously something that we've also gone back and reevaluated systemically as we've rolled out the different pieces. So from elementary to middle, and now from middle to high, we're going back and we're really looking at lessons learned. But I don't think the snapshot data necessarily does us any favors in that regard, and really showing the progress that we've made, and also still where some of the challenges may be, because it isn't looking at it on a longitudinal basis for the same cohorts. So thank you.
And then in reference to the single language evaluation, or looking at the development of a bilingual learner versus a single language learner, that is a challenge that the field in general is looking at now. What is the bilingual trajectory for literacy? And yes, it doesn't match with the single language learning of other students. So a student learning only English might learn English faster, but a student who's learning both languages has a combination of resources available to them to literacy. And so what does that look like with our current data? That is something that our team is looking at with the evaluation team and with the iStation ISIP team, and also our external consultants, to see if AISD can lead the way nationally with trying to determine how do you measure that bilingual trajectory for literacy. So it's something we're working on.
I think that's fabulous, because it's also important that we're able to evaluate those teachers in a way that's applicable to what they're doing, and same thing with those principals in dual language schools, because otherwise you're expecting them to attain certain levels of progress and proficiency that may not necessarily apply to their specific children, especially if you're looking at a school that is almost exclusively dual language. So I think that would be helpful in us being able to utilize that and how we look at how we can better evaluate both our teachers and our administrators in those schools. It's more consistent with the work that they're doing.
I've even heard Dr. Kaufman say we need to add up the scores. So 60% proficient in English and 60 in Spanish, then it's 120% proficient. I just think it's amazing. We have 4-year-olds in our schools right now that can do things in 2 different languages, who can communicate. That's a skill. And that's something to build upon, and that's additive. What's a deficit to say, no, that's wrong. And those are messages sometimes we send, maybe just not intentionally, but it is what then the institution sends to a student when they say that's not valued. And for us, in our approach to dual language, it's biliteracy, it's bilingualism, and it's biculturalism. It's not any one dimension. We've tried the one-dimensional thing. It doesn't work. It didn't work then, it didn't work today, and it's not going to work tomorrow either. It is about changing a mindset. Trustee Tyke also mentioned about recognizing that somebody who speaks a second language, that's a bonus. To graduate from high school, you need to have earn credit in another language in high school. So it's not like it's unheard of, like we've never done something like that. We certainly have. And what a benefit if a 4-year-old already comes into our system, and they do, already with another language. And we're going to teach them English along the way. It may take time. I think any of us were in 1 year supposed to learn Chinese and be fluent in another language would say, really? But I don't know why sometimes that's okay to do that to students. But it's changing our thinking. It is. We'd all say we're not going to do it. That's just not right. But somehow that's okay to do that to an 8-year-old, and just say, well, no, it is what it is, right? Well, it isn't what it isn't. It is not that. But it is a change of a mindset all the way from the beginning, and we really were at a very different readiness level. I don't know that we as a system recognize that a second language was a plus. So I just think those fundamental things, we had to start really from that point to where we are today. It's not perfect, and there are issues along with this, but it's something that we have to study in our data with Martha and Dr. Doolittle, meeting with her and seeing what principals are saying, teachers are saying, how we can actually make it better so that students are ready for college, career, and life. But it's three-dimensional. Bilingualism, biliteracy, and bicultural. It all has to, and it can't be one day on bicultural. It can't just be the one day we talked about whatever. That's not what we're talking about, right? It's an appreciation for, it's an understanding, it's an acceptance, it's a recognizing that it does exist. And that's truly part of somebody's background, their life, and their heritage. And we have this, whether it's in, we do this Vietnamese to a dual language, we do Spanish across the district, we're looking at Chinese. So we're trying to make ourselves a better organization and understand students' strengths.
Dr. Cruz, I want to tell you, I really appreciate that, because you answered a question I had, which was going to be about what's the student-centric goal outcome of bilingual education, dual language, and you just answered it. So thank you for that. Trustee Matthias, Trustee Wagner, and then Trustee Ellens, and then I think we're going to move on to and then you all, because we're doing this for over an hour, which is okay on the agenda. I just wanted to note that, and then we'll do you all. So, Trustee Matthias.
Thank you. So my question is principally for administrators who have to work with this data. So I have a few questions for data, but I'll put that on the side and come back in just a moment. Because ultimately the question that I have for administrators, especially the Area 1 superintendent, is how do you make sense as administrators of all this data? We get so many numbers for so many schools in so many different test areas that ultimately the job of administrators, it seems, is to take all this test data and to make it actionable. And I was sensing that on one slide was an attempt to say, this is our plan of action for all elementary schools in reading and math. but I'm going to be honest that I'm not sure that scratches my itch. So what I'd like to do is come back in a moment to the question for administrators. What do y'all help us as trustees to understand? You see this, you see the data that we see. What does that mean, especially for particular schools? And the perspective that I bring is with a focus on District 2 schools. I have to trust that other trustees are helping us keep the eye on other single-member districts in the way that I do that in District 2. So I'll come back to administrators in a moment after I ask a few data questions. First data question, I think maybe for the officers just as well as for administrators, and that is there any better way for us as trustees and or as staff and administration to see all the numbers that we get? I think I raised the issue to officers after the last time we got a big amount of data. And essentially, the question for us as trustees with all that we're involved in is how to make sense of so many numbers. I end up doing it myself, but I'm not sure that that's our job to do the color coding and everything that we need to do to be able to try to visualize, to understand what the data are saying to us. So I just want to lay that on the table. Again, you know, is there any way for us as trustees and or administrators, staff members, to get data that might help us better understand the story? And I don't know if anyone can help us with that.
So that's always a challenge, right? So many data points, so many campuses, so many different perspectives to look at it. What we did this time was to try to stay focused just around benchmark data. And so we thought the bubble charts would be helpful to you. Just a note about the bubble charts. The visuals are helpful, right? We provide the campus level reports disaggregated by student group and then summed by level, so that you can go look at your individual campuses and individual student groups that may be of interest to you. I think the visuals, like the bubble charts, are more helpful to you. We chose this particular representation because we know that it's going to be comparable to what you'll see in the 2018 accountability system. So in one of the domains, right, there's actually sort of this same visual where the percentage of students meeting the standard relative to the percentage of students who are economically disadvantaged on the campus is sort of a sliding scale, if you will. And so and the trend looks very much like our trend. As you see a higher percentage of economically disadvantaged students, you see that the performance rates of those campuses go down, and we see that play out in the accountability system where the majority of campuses that are rated IR also have very high percentages of economically disadvantaged students. So all that to say that I think the visuals are helpful to you because it establishes that trend line. And just as you might expect, we're looking at those campuses that are outliers to that trend, those cases where either economic disadvantage percentage is relatively low, as is performance, are the other type of outliers, those campuses that are sort of beating the odds, if you will, where they have a high percentage of economically disadvantaged students, but we're also seeing very high levels of performance. And so we are trying hard to try to give you some sort of a visual that kind of lays it out for you about where the outliers are, but also to give you the background information by campus and by student group. For our campuses, I don't know that I would say that any of the reports that you see tonight are really probably all that helpful or all that useful to them, right? That this is not what they work from. This is our attempt to sort of give you some sense of what benchmark results look like and report those out. But as you might expect, you know, campuses are looking at many data points around individual students. These results will be disaggregated by reporting category, by standard. They'll do an item analysis. Some of our systems do all of that. But I guess in answer to your question, that these are really not the type of thing that our campuses work from. They're far too high level to be particularly helpful.
I appreciate that. I would want to acknowledge the helpfulness of the bubble charts for us as trustees too, because then we can start to see where our schools are at. If I'm not mistaken, in the past we've seen the mean as a line in bubble charts. I don't know if that's something maybe that staff could do. I say that only because once you put the line in, then suddenly you realize that we as trustees realize, wait a minute, this school, which seems to be doing fairly well, is still below the line. They have some work to do. I don't know if the same would be said of staff. It just seems that there are ways that we can help to visualize the data that would help staff and trustees to be able to help me out here to raise the accountability of all who are working in our schools. The final data question I have simply relates to the writing scores that I'm seeing in District 2. Essentially, the question that I have is why it is that we don't have data for writing for 5 out of 7 schools for which we have data for white students. So what I'm noticing is that we have data at various schools for reading and math, but less data for writing. And where I'm noting that is in white students. We have reading and writing data for white students in 7 students of District 2, but only 2 schools in District 2 in writing. I don't know if I'm explaining myself clearly enough. The same with African American students, whereas we have data for 14 schools with African American students in District 2 for reading and math. In writing, we have data for only 8 schools. So I'm wondering what it is that we are missing, that we're not seeing writing scores for all student subgroups.
So because it's a public-facing document, we do recognize the sort of acknowledgement around small cell sizes as a FERPA requirement. When you look at those reading and math scores at the elementary level, we've rolled together grades 3 through 5. At middle school, we've rolled together 6 through 8. But when you look at writing scores, it's a single grade level, right? 4 and 7. So the writing scores are violating those small cell sizes by the time we disaggregate them out across all of those student groups. But you don't see that at reading and math because there's multiple grade levels rolled together.
Okay, I appreciate that. And maybe I could come back to the area superintendents and put them on the spot, but this is not a game of gotcha. I think it's simply, I have various takeaways that I see when I read District 2 data. And my ultimate question is, how do we as trustees and staff and administrators figure out what all these numbers mean for it to be actionable?
Right, and I think the data that we collect is a little different than what we're showing tonight. We take it by individual teachers, and take it down to that level so that we can then provide that support for those teachers on those campuses. We also have campuses address their critical adjustment questions so that we're gathering what have you done in the past, what are we going to adjust now. We're visiting classrooms, we're providing PD on a needs base for each campus. So the data we go a little deeper. And that helps us make sense of how to support the schools.
I appreciate that. At least the data as they're shared with us this evening, the questions that I would ask about these data are, what is happening at Zavala and Wadane in District 2? And this is just to focus on District 2, so I hate to bore other trustees, but what's happening at Zavala and what's happening at Wadane? That is to say, there's something about the data where the scores are higher in those 2 schools on average above other schools, that it just makes me wonder what's happening in terms of best practices, and or if there's anything that we can learn at other District 2 schools. Other takeaways that I see here is the real need for reading support at certain schools. And that's where I'm wondering, I think for us as trustees trying to stay the level of resources and policy, is there anything that we need to be doing as trustees to be making sure that schools that need support, for instance, in reading or in math, or that certain student groups are getting those resources? You know, is there any policy and or decisions that we need to be making as a board to be getting the resources to those student groups and or to those schools? And I don't know to whom that question is addressed. I think it's more for us as maybe even the superintendent and for us as a board to figure out, you know, how do we make sure that this is just one snapshot, we realize that, but how do we make sure that we're getting those resources to those schools where the scores here are suggesting that they need additional resources?
I think that'll be part of the work session.
There you go.
On bilingual education as well. Okay. Thank you, Trustee.
I'll rest.
Trustee Rector.
So a few things. One of the things I think that would be helpful for me that we don't necessarily see here, and I'm sure if I looked back through my archives I could find it all, but sadly with my stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks of binders, I'm not always that quick to find them, but is seeing year over year by student group how those student groups are moving, and really the one that, well, there's a more than one that I'm watching. I mean, I'm watching things like district results by language, because we're seeing our Spanish testers testing so much lower than our English testers in elementary school. I'm also seeing that our limited English proficiency students are testing lower, so those are things that I'm definitely mindful of. But the one group that I keep coming back to as well is the African American group. Even looking at all the MOIs here, every single MOI average that we're looking at, with the exception of one, our African American students are testing lower than our economically disadvantaged students as a whole. And so that is an ongoing issue that I know we've had ample discussion about, but it's pretty stark in looking at these numbers as well. One thing I would like to understand is, now that we're talking about the implementation of the African American Achievement Plan, when did that really truly become actively implemented? Are we seeing any gains from that in these scores that we're looking at over last year? And I think it would also be helpful, maybe not in tonight's discussion, but maybe either as a follow-on, to really understand more tactically how that program is going to be addressing specific issues that we're seeing here in terms of those pretty significant achievement gaps, sometimes as much as 8 or 9 points in some areas that I'm seeing versus economically disadvantaged student group. So pretty big gaps, and compared against white student groups or non-economically disadvantaged, those are even broader. So that would be helpful to understand. The other thing I'm wondering about as well is, well, first on the reading piece, I think Trustee Mathias brought up a valuable point of resourcing for reading in our campuses, and the longer I sit in this seat, the more I come back to the significant impact that literacy and numeracy for our students in those earliest years of elementary truly have in their long-term outcomes and success. And so I'm starting to wonder too, as we look at putting our money where our mouth is and budgeting, is where you all feel we are most lacking, and where we need to be budgeting more to have that greater and sustained long-term impact for our students in terms of their literacy and their numeracy moving forward, so that they can start to perform better on these higher level achievements that we're seeing into the high school years. And if that is the case, where you guys feel like we need to be at, what do we need to be looking at critically within our budgeting to say that? Because I know right now we've asked our community to prioritize between 4 choices, but one of those 4 choices is not additional resources for reading or other specific areas that we're seeing achievement gaps in. So I think that would be, I would appreciate, since we have the wisdom of so many sitting in front of us tonight, understanding from you guys where you feel like that's needed the most at this point.
Well, one is on, it's not just with early literacy, but it certainly is around teachers and retaining the teachers. So one of those is about teacher pay, and the other one's about the sort of the whole package around insurance. I do think that's significant for us, whether that's early literacy or any grade level, and that's really the teachers. And those who we keep and those who we attract for those that leave for so many different reasons. I think that's an essential one. But I'll ask Sandra or Ms. Creswell or Mr. Hicks, maybe hone in a little bit more on literacy, some of the pieces that are planned for this upcoming school year. Dr. Goodnow did talk about that within the literacy plan, and some of those resources already exist, but now it's training in another area around literacy, whether that's, and specifically in early childhood education. But maybe you want to just hone in on some of those points. And then also with the African American Achievement Plan, maybe hit on some of the items from that specific piece that we had talked about before and how that is coming along.
So, as was mentioned in the PowerPoint earlier, we're going to continue to implement structured independent reading from year one of the plan, and then this year our active reading and our connected writing, and next year an introduction to the writing workshop, all with fidelity to the greatest extent possible. And ongoing professional learning is going to be extremely important in order to make that actionable and to begin to see results. So with the literacy piece, it's really important that we ensure that the things that we said that we were going to do, and I'm going to go back to the MOI results, but it's really bigger than that, is teaching the science with the science of reading in mind. When we think about the professional learning piece, there are 5 strong components to any good reading program: the phonics, the phonemic awareness, the fluency, the vocabulary, and the comprehension. So within that, putting that into a balanced literacy concept is extremely important, and having that foundation where we implement all of those things and we measure to ensure that students have acquired those skills over the course of time, and then provide just-in-time interventions if they haven't. So a big part of the African American Achievement Plan is not waiting. If we see from data that there is an issue or a concern, that we immediately provide just-in-time interventions to ensure that students are successful. The African American Achievement Plan does call for every school to submit a monitoring commitments plan, and I've talked about that at several meetings before, about the fact that we're actually focused on our African American students, that every principal in the district, I dare say, knows every single African American student on campus and is able to talk about what their plan of action is for that student. And then they come back and they say, okay, as a school, these are 4 or 5 things that we commit to doing in order to ensure that we're progress monitoring the African American Achievement Plan and the strategies that we're implementing throughout the entire year. They are in the process right now of submitting their data from the middle of the year so that they can actually look at it on their profile sheets that they developed at the beginning of the year that let them know who those students are and see how they're doing. And they talk about them, I dare say, every week at their leadership team meetings, and we have level meetings. Each one of us is committed, all 4 associate superintendents, to having something about the African American Achievement Plan at every level meeting. So we're really focused on it, and we're committed to ensuring that that plan is successful.
Thank you. Trustee Wagner, any other questions?
Yeah, I think I was still wondering about the budgeting piece in terms of where we are lacking in resources and where we would have more significant impact with increased resources.
That's a loaded question.
Dr. Cruz left.
Oh, okay. You know, he when you first said that, he mentioned, you know, the teacher piece, and you know, teachers are the key in the classroom. So anything that we can do to attract quality teachers to any classroom is really the answer to that question, and that is multifaceted. It's hard to put one single answer to that question other than the fact that it's the teacher in the classroom in the end. So that involves leadership and providing them with the support they need in order to ensure that they're able to keep teachers to attract them in the first place, and then keep them in the classroom. And that's the take I would like to make on it. In the end, it's about the teacher.
Thank you.
And I would say it's coaching those teachers, and it's providing that staff to do the coaching. It's easier on some of the smaller campuses, but on the larger campuses to get to the point where you can be in the classroom and really teach side by side with that teacher is important as well. So that's another budgeting item, I would think.
So when you say coaching, would that be a coach per campus or a coach per grade level in like campuses that we're seeing are struggling more? I mean, what in your mind would be a more, knowing that we probably won't be able to get to ideal, but what would be a closer step to that in your mind?
In my mind, it would be at least a coach per campus,
Okay.
because we don't have that.
And as far as cults and reading specialists, is that something that should be further enhanced? Because I know we've had the conversations too about having one cult for a campus of 250 kids versus one cult for a campus of 1,000 kids is problematic. Is going to a ratio-based system for calls or things like that something that you guys would see significant value in as well?
That would be something to look at. It's the ratio. I know I could just say Kiker, and everybody understands that with that many kids, 1,100 students, one cult is hard. So you get very creative on how do we provide an additional person out there.
And I know for some of our campuses that are not economically disadvantaged or Title I campuses, that many times the PTAs through fundraising support are making up the difference. And so I think that is also weighting our more affluent campuses for success in that way. So I think I'm thinking too of being mindful of where do we need to make sure that those supports are present across all campuses as well. So I think I'm really truly trying to pick y'all's brain and understand where you're seeing those gaps and deficits and where we need to be thinking more carefully about placing those resources. So.
And I would say that we've been working very closely with Dr. Goodnell's team, and how do we provide additional supports and presence on campuses as well right now.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Ellens?
Oh, you teed me up wonderfully. Thank you. Really appreciate those statements. Actually, I'll come back to that in a minute. I do have just some overall questions. Okay, we've said in different statements tonight that this data is predictive, and then we've also said it is not predictive. Could we get, not tonight, but could we get some, I guess, longitudinal information? How do the MOIs predict the end of year exams, maybe for the last 3 to 5 years, so that we could sort of get some context around the real answer there? The other thing I'm trying to figure out as we go through, I'm a little bit with Trustee Matthias. It's a lot of numbers, and I so appreciate y'all explaining that this is really not what the campuses see, because for me, I'm thinking, anyway, you don't want to know what I'm thinking. But if I'm reading 9th grade English 1 scores, when we go as a 9th grade effort, is that really a result of this teaching of that 9th grade teacher? Or is this everything leading up to English 1? And then what is the process for working backward? Because my assumption is that 9th grade teacher is not the reason for the test scores that we see. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it is very specific to the 9th grade TEKS.
I'll start. I think it would be a good point to talk about how we look at the data and how we disaggregate it.
Well, and maybe it's a good time, because I might be the reason a lot of y'all are in the room, and I apologize for making you sit through this. But we've asked a lot of times when we have these conversations, you've heard a couple trustees mention, I would love to really understand what happens from the time the test is taken, the data comes back. I would love the teachers, principals, whoever's here from the different levels to kind of walk me through what you do with that.
So I will give it a good try, and then I have Ms. Hosak to follow up if needed. The first thing you look at is department-wide where the data is what the data is telling you. And what you're looking for is not the percentage passing or failing. You're looking at specific skill sets. Math would be, an example would be fractions and decimals. Science would be dissecting a frog, or in English would be writing a thesis statement. Very discrete, specific skills. If department-wide you have low scores across all teachers, then you look as a learning community of teachers and say, okay, we have to reteach that particular skill because it looks like we are all behind. It didn't reach the kids. It doesn't mean failure. It just means we've got to do it another way. After going through that, then you do a teacher-by-teacher breakdown. Let's say you have 5 teachers in an English 1 courses. 4 of the 5 seem to score well on this skill, and 1 of the 5 does not. That is a coaching situation either by the team or by an outside entity who will come in and help that teacher teach that particular skill. Then you go down to student by student, and you're looking for trends, and that's where the before school, after school, and during the school day tutoring comes in. Sylvan comes in. That's when you will have the peer tutoring and then the grouping within a classroom in centers based around skills. So if in an English 1 class you have 20 students, all 20 students didn't get the same question wrong. They have different skills needs. So the teachers will create center work so that they can work in the groups of where they're deficient. Then you come back out and look at student groups, which is level 4, which is now you take a look at overall African American performances, Hispanic performance. You'll look at all sorts of different large school-wide groups to see if there are trends or terrible trends or good, and then we react that way. And that's usually with professional development in that 4th bucket. So going down the list, the data that teachers are seeing is not the data you're looking at. They're looking at student by student. The assistant principal and the department chair is looking teacher to teacher. The principal is looking school-wide. And my role in this is to, okay, now that you've gone through this entire process, what are your clear next steps? And in many cases during this review, I will get district help to go out immediately. Give one example. We were at a school, and one of the schools were saying the kids couldn't read, and this is a biology teacher or department chair. So I immediately said, okay, we can't make you a reading teacher today, but there are avid strategies that would work that could help you do the pre-reading, and we immediately got someone out to the campus to provide that professional development. So that's how so each of those levels creates a set of plans, and then principal's responsibility is to manage all of it and to ensure the fidelity of keeping to those plans, and my role is to coach the principal through that process.
So we know, thank you, Ms. Hosek, for stepping in, and so take it from him.
Absolutely. I think I hit the right button. Did I hit the right button? Anytime we look at data, we're going to look at self to standard, self to others. And so in this particular case for Moy, from my vantage point, looking at self to others school to school is difficult due to Moy windows, due to delivery of instruction, due to innovation in that instruction, et cetera. But as we drill down, going self to self is something that I can easily do. How did we do last year? Because I know that I'm in control of how was that test administered last year, at what point in the year was that test administered last year, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm okay with self to self in that respect, and so I absolutely am looking how we performed last year versus how we're performing this year. And then self to standard is something that's obviously huge for us, especially as a standards-based grading campus, knowing what standards have we identified as power standards and how are we performing on those, because as you implement standards-based grading, you are saying this is where we want to narrow but go deep. And so we really have to pay attention to how our MOI tests are designed around that. And I don't know that those two things have caught up with each other yet. So being really fair about all of those things. And then Dr. Shapiro was right. Then we take it down to, okay, if we're still looking at data the same three ways, self to self, self to other, self to standard, teacher by teacher, that's a fair comparison to make because it's all within the same school, within the same subject. And so making those kind of comparisons seem very, very fair and very that's level ground for us to have good collaboration for our teachers, having honest conversations about, you absolutely did an amazing job with this particular standard, these particular set of questions. What are you doing that I'm not doing? So really having that fuel our conversation in our PLCs, making sure that we're cycling back in our standards that perhaps we did not perform as well as we had hoped to or should be. And then, taking a look at that as it winds up to our yearly map for curriculum. Have we even gotten to it yet? And so I think we really scratch at the data and try to make sense of it. As we did our mid-year review, really figuring out, is this a content question or is it a skill question? Is it a reading comprehension question? What is it? And so being able to have those conversations and what student groups perhaps did not have so much success with a particular question. Those are all questions that we're asking to our staff.
So I really appreciate you just pointing out that lots of times you may miss a science problem because of the reading issue.
Absolutely.
So I've heard lots of references. I think there's some reorganization going on, so maybe it works this way. But when is it a red flag that literacy or reading is the underlying point versus knowledge?
Literacy is a red flag for us from the moment go. When we are cognizant of and I can only speak for high schools, so and I can only speak for my school, I should say. But we know that we are from the moment that a student walks through the door of Aikens High School, I know my percentage of students that are not on grade level reading. And so it is consistently at the forefront of what we're doing, is wrapping in those literacy skills into every single content. But it's never not an issue.
Well, so by the time they get to high school, this is a real challenge. So I'm trying to get a little bit to Trustee Wagner's point and how we can ensure that we're just not doing the same old thing. You will never teach a struggling reader to read using structured independent reading. You will never teach a challenged dyslexic learner to read using anything but academic language therapy. So if we are throwing high dosage tutoring, we're throwing all kinds of expenses and time and energy toward this, we will never be successful. So there's a real simple answer, and it is a budget issue, but it's really a trade-off. I don't think it's more money. It's putting the money in the right direction. And so I'm trying to understand when we're seeing reading as the underlying issue to all these things, what kind of resources, especially at a high school level, but really I know we're working on a middle school program. We've got cults in all our elementaries, but one cult for 1,000 kids is just ridiculous, and it's an insult, to be honest. So I'm trying to get to a point of assistance versus anger, and this is not at any of y'all, to be honest. It's really to what Trustee Mathias and Wagner were saying, is we are trying desperately to set up systems at this level that help you versus hearing, oh, we don't have a cult, we can't do that. What can we do at our level to change that story? Does that make sense?
I'd like to, one thing that Mr. Hicks shared earlier when we talked about the importance of having a very strong teacher in the classroom, I think the other thing that he shared was the science of reading. And I think that is a really big, I think is an important piece in terms of as we start as we work with our teachers in terms of professional development and the skill set in terms of how to teach the science of reading. And so the more resources that we can put in place in terms of having strong teachers, but also being able to teach that, to do PD in the science of reading across all content areas, then then we can take that approach of that culture of every teacher is a reading teacher, and we're implementing that science of reading across all content areas.
And for maybe 80 to 90% of your kids, that will be enough. But for 10% of your kids, that is not going to be enough. And until we realize that, we will never get where we want on these charts. So how do we help you get there? And so whether it's training the high-level decision makers on the need for this, or if it is just rather than hiring a coach on every campus, it's another cult, or I don't know how to get there, to be honest. We're really looking to you guys to tell us what you need, but we don't have enough time to kind of wait. Once they get to high school, it is, I mean, academic language therapy still works, but it is a challenge. Even middle school, it's a challenge. And I came from a training where Garland ISD was reading what we're doing. They're so impressed. They've automatically, in their budget next year, put $3 million for dyslexia. Is that what you need? That's the kind of thing I'm asking from you guys tonight, because doing the same old to try to just pour resources and time and focus on these kids goes back to the earlier conversation. So are we going to do a PBL project with them to learn it instead of just drill and kill? I don't feel like we give you that flexibility to make that decision because we just feel so oppressed from the state. So I will go back to I had a couple trustees say, we have no choice, and I would challenge my trustees. We absolutely have a choice. The state has its structures that it's set in place. We don't have to buy into their definition of what it means to be successful. If we believe that we're doing some really great stuff that they don't value, well, shame on them. But we can't sit here and say we have no choice. We have lots of choices. I do want to ask for two more things, if we can get from a follow-up. We get the disaggregated data that's by race and by low SES, SPED, and ELL. I'm going to ask for it in 504 students. And just for kicks, I'd love to get it in gender subgroups. As long as we're talking about subgroups, and if there are situations where we might do district-wide efforts, I think it would be valuable to understand those things as well. Okay. Are middle school algebra students captured in this MOI data at any point?
There are no middle school students in any of our data that's not captured in ours.
So
it is not getting captured in high school data, if that's what you're asking.
So, so for STAR, our 8th graders or even 7th graders taking algebra will be taking STAR. Do we give them MOIs?
For Algebra 1?
Uh-huh.
Algebra 1 students, they do have a MOI that they can take.
They can. They don't have to.
I mean, we have a situation where our students at that level are performing extremely well in terms of mathematics.
Yeah, it is you opt into a program, puts you in a different kind of echelon. And then I want to just double check something I heard. And it might have been you, Deborah, so you might have to come back. And I hope I misheard this, but I think you said we don't really use the MOI data? Did you mean it in these reports?
Yeah. The campuses
don't use these reports.
Receive these reports, but the question is, how do the campuses use them? And my response is, they probably don't use these particular reports very much, except in a general sense.
Okay.
They have much more detailed student and teacher specific reports that they use.
Okay. I do think at the end of the day, our job here is to get you the resources you need to do this work well. It is the main point of our work, so please help us know what you need. Thank you.
Thank you. This has been great dialogue. I just want to time check our trustees. We're over an hour past the time that we had on this issue. I'm just saying as a time point because we have two other issues. So I know it's Trustee Cowan and Trustee Tite.
I'm okay. I don't.
You're right.
Well, wait a minute. Now, I might suggest that I'm going to challenge our officers.
Yeah.
We didn't give accurate time on this.
Yeah.
It should have been more than 30 minutes.
Yeah. No, we've been talking for an hour and a half, so this is great dialogue. I'm not trying to.
90 minutes and
Yeah.
okay.
And then
Yeah.
it'll be okay.
Yeah.
I'm good.
You sure?
Y'all,
Yes, ma'am.
Well, since I was a teacher, and once a teacher, always a teacher, first of all, I'm really glad to hear that on the campuses, teachers and staff are looking at each student individually because that's the way it should be, period. So when we receive these high-level reports, you know, we can go, oh, my God, you know, we've got X many Title I schools below, you know, certainly, and we should be concerned about that. But I am reassured in knowing that our teachers and staff are looking at each student individually, and that's the way it should be. You start right there. A comment about teacher retention. Working conditions are extremely important to teachers. And I'm going to say again that at some of our campuses, and I'll say districts 1, 2, and 3. I'm not sure what it's like in the other campuses because those constituents don't really come to me that much, but they do in 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to say that in some of those campuses, there's still a very top-down approach, and teachers are not viewed as collaborators, and they're told what to do, and their input is not really valued. And so I can provide some of those specifics to the associate superintendents privately. I think that's a better way to deal with it. Another comment, the review of the MOI gives us an opportunity to talk about a wide range of things related to academics, and that is our core purpose is academics. I mean, that's what we do. We're supposed to be teaching our kids. And so I appreciate that opportunity, but we have certainly moved beyond the MOI in this discussion, and I'm okay with that. And then, Dr. Eaton, your comment about every teacher is a teacher of reading, that is so true. And even teachers who don't quite understand the complexities of working with a dyslexic student can be taught some techniques to help that student read social studies textbook or whatever materials. They can be taught some techniques to help those kids. And then when they continue to struggle, yes, there should be a CALT available or some expert available to help that child further, and that's where I see targeting of resources to be very important when we talk about going further and helping that kid really improve reading skills or math skills or whatever. I'm going to go back to the allocation of resources, and Trustee Ellens and other trustees have mentioned that's our job, is to make sure you all get your resources. And so we know that economics contribute to the disparities in the scores that we get from our students. So how can we help? How can we make sure that we are addressing the needs of struggling students? And then I'd hate to forget about just our kids who are doing well and achieving and you know, are gifted and talented and all that. We shouldn't ignore them. We tend to focus so much on our struggling, we forget those kids. They need resources too. So we need to keep that in mind. I don't expect an answer to my question again, but we need to keep that in mind. Also, a question, how often do high school, middle school, and elementary school principals and other administrators in a vertical team, understanding we don't have all pure vertical teams, how often do they sit down together and address the learning disparities that they see in their subpopulations and try to tease out the root causes and figure out a way to address those root causes? And you don't need to answer that tonight, but I think that's a critical question, because if we're not if these administrators are not sitting down together and going like, hey, you know, I'm seeing an issue here in grade 1 or at this elementary school, or it's happening in grade 3, but when they start testing or whatever, and we're not talking about, you know, about how to address those particular needs, and they may be different from one vertical team to another. You know, some vertical teams don't have the same economic issues as others do, but even within those vertical teams, you're still going to have some economic disparities. So I think that if that's not being done, I think that we need to to encourage that time be allowed for that. And then, in the best possible worlds in Nirvana, if we weren't under state-mandated testing, what kind of data should we be gathering in order to evaluate how well our students are doing in reading, writing, and math? What would be the best way to do that? Because I think that our teachers and our administrators are extremely well-trained people. Otherwise, I don't think we'd hire them. And I think they've already got a pretty good idea of what they should be looking at in those 3 core areas in terms of determining whether or not a child is ready to move from, say, grade 1 to grade 2, even though those are arbitrary. Those are arbitrary. Grades are arbitrary. Grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, they're arbitrary. Somebody decided, all 6-year-olds should be doing, Anyway, so in the best of all possible worlds, what would we be looking for? What kind of data? What kind of data would we want? How would we evaluate? Because we have to have some hard data, like, we have to know if this kid can read text that's considered appropriate for a first grader, second grader, third grader. Or we know math teachers, I know, are particularly good about saying, that kid's not ready for algebra, 8th grade math, 7th grade math, or whatever. Or I'm seeing a major issue in this child solving word problems at grade 3 because, A, they can't read very well, or they can't operationalize the words, and then they don't know how to do the mathematical procedures from there. So that's another thing y'all can discuss too. I'd be interested in hearing what that Nirvana looked like.
Thank you, Trustee Tyson. Does anyone want to respond or no? Okay. All right. So thank you. So the next, thank you.
Thank you all. I know we didn't get to everybody, but hopefully this was fun.
The next item on the agenda is a discussion on DEC local proposed amendments on compensation and benefits, leaves, and absences. The discussion is part of Core Belief 2 that we will create an effective, agile, and responsive organization, and Commitment 6, create a positive organizational culture that values customer service and every employee. Dr. Cruz? Okay.
So board members, Dr. Medina is going to come up. Did I see Kristen? I don't know if it's going to be Dr. Medina or Edna, but for sure it's going to be Dr. Medina. So I'm right on that. So what we want to do is just go through maybe just some high-level key points of this particular policy, but I really want to open it up to board members to any questions that you may have regarding this particular policy. We're not going to go page by page, point by point, maybe hit on 3 key points around this policy, and then we'll just open it up to questions.
Sure. So Fernando Medina, Chief Human Capital Officer, and with me I have Kristen Hilsebeck. We got a little, had to make a quick little stop, and she'll be in just a little bit. So you might be asking what we're here doing again tonight, and we did bring the DEC policy last fall. And so to bring you up to speed, we had been working with TASB on some changes that we wanted to make to the policy, and particularly we were focusing on particular areas and getting feedback from TASB. So we submitted those changes, and they came back and they approved those changes. Well, they don't necessarily approve them, you approve them, but they did give us feedback on some areas which we had not changed. And so tonight we bring you one or two things. Number one is some items that they thought that we should come back and reconsider. And in fact, after reviewing those, we really felt that we needed to provide some further clarification. So let me give you just 1 or 2 examples. One example, we didn't change the language. If you go to page, let's see here. There's a page that has the tables. So if you go to page 8 of your document, you'll notice at the top right-hand corner, the word accrued is being struck. And they made it very clear to us that within the Texas Education Code that our employees do not accrue leave. Actually, Texas Education Code gives them all their leave up front, all of their state days up front. But when an employee leaves, it's actually prorated. So if they don't stay with us the entire year, whatever amount of days that they didn't use, it would be deducted from their paycheck at that time. So that, in this case, words matter. And so they made recommendations on, and that's just one example. The second type of change that I'm bringing to you tonight are some unanticipated kind of things that happened when we implemented the changes that we made. And we wanted to take this opportunity to go ahead and make those corrections. And the big change is really around parenting leave. You'll remember that in the fall, I brought to you that we were taking out the parenting leave section because parenting leave is actually covered within the Family Medical Leave Act. And so we felt that it was duplicating language. And so we took out the parenting leave from the local type of leave and we placed it under family medical leave. Well, an unanticipated piece to that was that in doing so, because family medical leave is unpaid leave unless the individual has accrued days, and also the mother would receive partial payment. What we didn't take into account was that if we had a spouse that wanted to access the parenting leave, it completely did not allow them to have that partial pay. So we came back and we reinstated the family medical leave and specifically outlined the way a spouse would get partial pay. And so that's really the really big one that we really felt that we didn't, the purpose of our edits last time were to provide clarification, communicate what our practice is, also implement best practice as identified by TASB, but it wasn't necessarily to pull away a benefit that had already been in place. And in fact, that was unanticipated, but it did happen. And it was isolated. We had a couple of situations, and this gives us an opportunity to make that whole and to correct it. So that's a really high level, but again, these are always a work in progress.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Trustee Tice. Sorry.
Well,
and then Trustee Anderson.
Contrary to what I did for the last session, I am okay with this. Reading that you have vetted this with, where you said in our backup materials, a working draft was developed in collaboration with Education Austin and with you, and the proposed amendments were reviewed by Legal Services and the Director of Intergovernmental Relations and Policy Oversight. We've also had TASB participate in this, and I appreciate the distinction between proration and accrual. I think most teachers would probably not understand the distinction, but we have that now in there as a protection, and hopefully we will educate our teachers about that and educate them about this policy once it is passed. So I don't have any additions or corrections on this, and I'm comfortable with what has been done. I'm comfortable with the vetting process, but that's just me, just one trustee. So I do appreciate your wading through all of the academic discussion, which I think is valuable for everybody to hear, and then I appreciate the fact that you've done due diligence in trying to get a policy in front of us that is helpful to our staff, and particularly that piece about parenting leave. So thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Tice. Trustee Anderson.
Thank you for this. I just have one quick question, and it's primarily related to putting the parenting leave back in here. Do you anticipate there being a fiscal impact, and if so, do you have an estimate of what that might look like?
Actually, we have not been within our operating, or to be honest with you, we have not been keeping track of that, but we have started to go through the documents to distinguish what exactly is being paid through that parenting leave so that we can identify what that fiscal impact is. Because again, that is a leave that our district provides, and we would want to know what cost is associated with that. And so definitely we will start unpacking that. We've been tracking, we average about 100 requests per month on leave, and what we want to do is to be able to unpack that and say exactly what are the different types of leave that are being requested, and what would be the cost analysis for that.
Great. Any other questions? Trustee Ellens?
Will we have that analysis before being asked to vote on this?
I can try to work towards that, and we can certainly try to do that.
But what this policy, we're following what the law says. We can't not do this, no matter the cost.
Right, so correct. So there are different types of leave. There's some leave that's required by law, right? family medical leave, for example. And that leave is unpaid leave unless the employee has accrued vacation days, personal days, local sick days, and that's what, they have access to. Regardless of whether we want to or not, they've earned that. The type of leave that we really want to capture and to be able to put, to be able to analyze how much it's really what we give above and beyond, and that's really the partial pay. And so what we'll do is we'll look at how much, and we believe that we can do that. We'll get that to you, Trustee Ellens, so that way, because that's really the piece that's in question.
But then there's also the costs that we give just to have substitutes in the classrooms. Yes? Is that all taken into account too?
Yes. So the partial pay, and this is actually outlined in here, we mentioned it 2 times in the document. Partial pay is the employee's daily rate, and then we reduce the cost of the substitute. So it's a partial pay. Unless it's a classified employee, then it's 50% of their daily rate. So we account for that.
Can I ask a clarification question just to compare? So the change around accrued and prorated means that our employees are front-loaded all of their leave? And
that is correct.
Prorated, and front-loaded means if they were to give you 2 weeks' notice, would they be paid for that leave, or does it stay with?
So as a reminder, within a Texas Education Code, we're required to front load it, so to speak, so they actually have access to it immediately. And we clarified that language throughout. So what that means is, and there's a schedule, so if we go to the schedule, let's see. So let's go to page 8 together and look at the top table. So if at the beginning of the year an individual has, that might not be the, let's see, that may not be the best example. So actually, let's go to page 7. So at the beginning of, if you go down to the top table, it says 12 months remaining. If they work all 12 months, they will have earned all those hours. But let's say that they leave after 4 months. It would be prorated 32 hours. So on their exiting check, they would get deducted the number, it would be subtracted out, even though they were given to them up front. And sometimes that does happen.
Thank you. Any other questions, trustees? Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Medina. Dr. Cruz?
Okay.
Did you have?
No, that concludes our presentation on this particular. This one is going to be up for board approval at the regular board meeting in March.
On March 26th. The last item on our agenda will be a closed executive session related to real property issues, from which we will adjourn this meeting pursuant to Texas Government Code 551.071.072 and .129. And we'll meet upstairs in a few minutes.